In the beginning, there was light. For Luca, a magnificent goddess brighter than the sun itself came upon the primordial realm of Engarden and saw in it a divine potential. With her own 2 hands, she divided the land from the sea, fashioned multitudes of living creatures to inhabit it, and established a natural order to ensure peace would reign forevermore. And then, as suddenly as she had arrived, Luca vanished, leaving behind only her brilliant afterimage. For just as shutting your eyes against the noonday sun cannot destroy its light, so too Luca's departure could not dispel the radiance with which she had graced this world. From the gilded spires of holy grounds to damp underground caves and secluded forest groves, her likeness and memory is everywhere. She is unforgettable, inescapable, eternal. But humans are fickle, and the memory of a god alone wasn't enough to appease them forever. Eventually, they began to start asking questions. Did Luca abandon us? Does she even care about our suffering? What divine will do we carry, if any at all? And if God truly is gone, then what fate awaits us after we die? Fundamentally, Afterimage is a game about human nature, and as we follow Renee's journey through the broken world of Engarden, we see how different groups respond to the existential crisis hanging over their heads. Some retreat from the world, clinging so desperately to their own lives that any meaning they might have once had is lost. Others sink into depravity, plundering and exploiting the weak for their own gain. A rare few choose to find meaning in the simple joys of mortality and make the most of the time they've been given. And one certain being makes a cold calculation. If God has abandoned us, then we must become our own God. The story of Afterimage is profound and beautiful, with deep world building, clever narrative design, and engaging mysteries that invite you to explore and get lost in the world of Engarden. It is also very dense and complex, told as it is through a combination of character dialogue, item descriptions, diaries, research notes, and echoes of past memory. In this sense, it is rather like a massive jigsaw puzzle. All the pieces are there, but scattered and fragmented, and my goal with this video is to put them all together. I'll be discussing just about everything from the earliest history of Engarden to the cryptic final ending, and by doing so hope to make the story clear for anyone seeking to understand it. As you might imagine, this is no simple task in a game as large and non-linear as Afterimage. Many important events in the story can happen in any order, so every player's experience is going to be significantly different. To keep things as clear and cohesive as possible, I tried to place everything in the order that makes the most sense narratively, while also being internally consistent with the order and flow of the game's world design. And with that, let's dive in. I sincerely hope you enjoy the complete lore of Afterimage. The story of Engarden begins with its creation, and to understand this process, we must first understand the 2 fundamental realms of existence. The physical realm, also referred to as the mortal realm or material realm, and the soul realm. The physical realm is pretty straightforward, a 3D space where physical matter resides. But the soul realm is much more complex, a vast interdimensional space containing many pockets only tangentially linked to one another, and which are created by souls. Every living soul leaves an imprint in the soul realm, and the strength of the soul determines how deep that imprint will be. These imprints are universally referred to as soul fields, and with the right magic, namely soul spells, it is possible for a being to enter their own soul field as well as to invade the fields of others, though the process contains a fair amount of risk since the invader's body is left behind in the physical realm, empty and unprotected. And while the majority of soul fields are generated by living creatures, there are exceptions to this. Very powerful artifacts known as Hallows have them as well, though in their case the order is reversed. The main body of the object actually exists in the soul realm, and they leave an imprint on the physical realm. This inverted relationship applies to the Goliath of Anemo as well. It is said that for Atomos, her soul field is her reality, and the physical realm is her dream. While the separation between realms is quite firmly fixed, as illustrated by the process of soul invasion, it is not absolute. For example, powerful soul magic like that contained in the Crimson Cape and Scroll of Otherworld enable the user to very briefly phase their body into the soul realm. This topic is pretty complex, but I'll talk about it more as we go, so for now, let's move on to the creation. In keeping with traditional Taoist belief, the creation of Engarden did not occur ex nihilo, or out of nothing. Rather, the world already existed in some form and was merely reshaped and named Engarden, and we are given a great deal of information regarding how this worked. According to legend, the first entity to exist in the world was Samser, the Goliath of Hydro and reincarnation, whose name is derived from the Sanskrit term samsara, meaning rebirth. It is said that she awoke eons ago, sending forth great drops of dew that transformed into powerful artifacts like the crystal orb Hallow. She lived in a dreamlike state within her soul field, a vast ocean-like realm known as the First Sea. This was a pretty sensible place to be, as the physical realm was barren. There was no water and no light, and it probably appeared much like an empty, unformed plain. The only meaningful object to be found here was the tablet, a monolith of celestial stone that whispered softly in the darkness, waiting. And here we get to Luca. Out in the cosmos, she awoke, an immensely powerful being who radiated the aura of light, or lux. In its root Italian, her name literally means bringer of light. She created a primeval language made up of primeval glyphs, characters that reflect the fundamental aspects of existence and were filled with her golden light. As she traveled through space and time, she had dealings with other beings, most notably Shenlong, with whom she was able to communicate without verbal language at all. Eventually, she arrived in the unformed realm, illuminating it with her brilliant halo of Genesis, and discovered the tablet. She studied it carefully, and the mysterious messages found upon it inspired her to create a new world. As explained in Test Record 58-2, the first action Luca took was to form the rock body, after which she irrigated it with the flood and carved out the streams. To accomplish this, she struck an accord with Samser in which the Goliath soul field would be merged with the physical realm and used as a place from which souls could be born. As Luca prepared for this critical step, she was surprised by the sudden appearance of the sword Persecoral, a relic from another world possessing the power to cut through the barrier between body and soul. She took up the weapon and severed the Hydro-Goliath soul field, and as the spiritual sea within poured out, it manifested as a great and terrible flood that swept over the world. Its purpose now fulfilled, Luca sealed away the primeval stone sword and fashioned her own, Sinra, to replace it. Once the floodwaters had settled to form the misty waters, she next drew out water from the sea to form the streams, and sea and Engarden finally became one. To spread the power of the sea evenly, Luca lifted great islands from Engarden's central valley into the sky to become the Sky Palace and Heart of Veins. She fashioned the Albedo Tower to draw the energy of the Sea of Souls up to the palace, where powerful winds would then carry the stream through the Heart of Veins and eventually deposit it as a water flow that turned the barren cliffs below into Emerald Falls. The water then worked its way deep into the roots of the mountain and carved out the Halcyon Veins, which served as a hub for a vast network of confluence trees that pulled the stream to all corners of the land, and what little remained seeped into the earth and eventually settled back into the valley. With most of its energy depleted, the stream here froze to form glistening caverns of ice, the Frozen Veins, and the water cycle continued in perpetuity. Now possessing both body and veins, the world of Engarden had become akin to a living entity, and humans would later theorize that it actually had some form of consciousness, since the final step of creation outlined in the test record was to let life flourish in Engarden. Life had, in fact, already begun to thrive. Ancient Document 3 tells us that most plants and animals were born naturally of the stream's union with the earth, including such creatures as spider monkeys, wolves, mushrooms, scorpions, and adorable crabs. This was a good start, but Luca had bigger plans and got to work constructing massive cradles powered by her primeval language. The first was built in the cavern later known as God's Hall, and is where she personally created life for the very first time in the form of the great birds, also referred to as the primeval beings. White feather birds to guard the Albedo Tower and maintain its essential function in the water cycle, golden crows to cast light over the land, and possibly the Phoenix Eldred. Luca then built another cradle, the Molten Sanctum, and used it to create the Goliaths, large elemental beings likely inspired by Samser. The Goliath of Animo, Atomos, the Goliath of Pyro, Ignis, and the Goliath of Geo, whom we know only as the Princess. These Goliaths in turn created scions, meaning children, using elemental wells Luca had built for them in their respective fields. Her work now nearing completion, Luca returned to God's Hall and built one more cradle close by, the Well of Being, for her final creation, humanity, a race of beings created in her own image. This is the basic creation process according to sources of both Goliaths and humans, but it is clearly oversimplified and incomplete, as plenty of beings fall outside of this neat framework. For starters, the Hemi-Goliath Cloudworm was designed by Luca, but ultimately created by Atomos, and the similarly named Kingworm may have come about in a similar fashion. We also have Seed, the Grand Fairy, who appears to possess similar power to that of Luca and Samser. She talks with them casually as friends, and possesses an aura so strong that even Ifri is intimidated by her, not to mention the fact that she can leave the realm at will and is well acquainted with Shenlong. The giant tortoise found by the Silent Coast was said to be born before humans stood upright in the land of Engarden, which would place it fairly early in the creation process, and its knowledge of the Halo of Genesis implies that it might even predate Luca herself. There's also the Ferryman, an ancient being who appears human but is in fact something else entirely, as confirmed by Ifri. The existence of these individuals belies a greater degree of complexity to the creation than the simple account we are given, and adding to the uncertainty are contradictions to the established order itself. For example, the archaic shrine and ancient Fang's description both imply that humans existed before Luca ever split the streams in the first place. The truth is, these events happened so far in the past that most sources must be treated as apocryphal. And that's okay. The most important thing to know, and what we know for sure, is that the world was created, living creatures were created to inhabit it, and it was all carefully planned from the start. The evidence for that last point is, of course, the code. From the beginning, every being was created with a distinct code to drive their nature and purpose. Just as Samser and the race of Hydra were tasked with guiding souls within the sea, the race of Pyro was given a primary duty to fight, to keep the peace in Engarden by force if necessary. The race of Geo was gifted with mechanical knowledge and tasked with maintaining the wells, and the race of Animo was responsible for nurturing the world with rain and dews in conjunction with the Golden Crows, who had arguably the most rigid code of all. Their story begins at the volcanic solar birthplace, where a crow is born at the start of each day with a duty engraved in its code and a clear stone ball embedded in its chest. This ball is filled with pure soul energy from the lava stream until it is bursting with light, at which point the crow takes flight, soaring through the sky and distributing its power over the land. When this energy reaches the clouds, Animo Scions under the guidance of Atomos combine it with stream there and transform it into dews, which fall down to the earth with rain. The crow continues its flight as the daytime sun, and when the light finally burns out, it becomes the cold moon and descends into the lunar graveyard past the misty waters. Falling into a deep sleep, the crow then enters the stream and is returned to the solar birthplace where it is reborn to start the process again. This is the cycle of day and night, and after 365 such flights, the crow will die in the lunar graveyard and be replaced by a newborn crow who will start another year. It may be a strict system, but nevertheless, this is the manner by which God deigned to nourish all beings. Now, something quite interesting about the path of the Golden Crow is that it appears to be linear, with the bird in question ending up at the opposite end of the world from where it started. But is this simply a case of needing a 2D map to display a globe, or could Engarden actually be a flat realm with fixed borders? The evidence is conflicting. On one hand, Stanley has an orrery in his shop depicting what seem to be planets, but on the other, we know for a fact that the sun and moon are birds and can't be served well by that model. What's more, if the misty waters bordered the Ruby Wood Desert, surely it would have been faster for 42 and Renee to travel west rather than east to get there. Ultimately, however, the answer to this might not matter so much when we consider the fundamental nature of the code. Namely, it is literal. It's clearly established that Engarden is, in some sense, an extremely complex program or simulation like you might find in a computer. The most obvious indication of this can be found in the wall ending when Renee and Ifri venture past the misty waters and find the primordial plane at Engarden's edge. They come upon a lone phone booth and dial an unknown number, after which the world disintegrates into streams of code before switching off entirely as though the channel had been changed. Far from being a mere Easter egg, this association with computer coding is deeply ingrained in the fabric of the world. Ignis is shown glitching out of existence in the game's opening sequence, perhaps representative of the moment he was killed on the battlefield, and the clouds above Ashen Canyon can be seen glitching in-game as well. Furthermore, it is revealed that Engarden is but one of many worlds in some kind of multiverse or cyberverse, and there are certain rare individuals who can and do travel between them. First and foremost is the being Shenlong, who originates from a distant realm with a different language. The nature of the Shenlong glyphs as Taoist trigrams imply this could be our own reality, as does the presence of the sword and the stone Persecoral, aka Excalibur, and the yin and yang symbol which can be found on several foreign items. Other world-hopping individuals include the mysterious Uncle White, the owner of the Visitor's Stopwatch, and maybe someone from Hallownest. My guess is Mr. Mushroom. I'll go into more depth about the Shenlong stuff later, so for now, let's get back to Luca and the dusk of creation. At the end, there was paradise. With streams coursing through Engarden's verdant lands and the newly formed humans taking their first steps, Luca's work had come to a close. She looked out over this young world brimming with promise, and then she disappeared, leaving it all behind. Where she went and for what purpose no one knew, yet all believed that one day she would return. Samsair and C both speak of Luca's imminent return, so this claim is pretty credible, and we also learned that Luca spoke to Atomos of destiny before her departure. Clearly this was all part of some greater plan, but the details had vanished with her. She left the world in the care and protection of the Goliaths, who were blessed with hearts that would lead them to do Luca's will in her absence. And the world moved ever onward in the light of her eternal afterimage. So, what exactly is the afterimage? In addition to being a metaphor for the deep impression Luca left on the world and its inhabitants, it is also her lingering primeval aura that provides Engarden with light and spiritual energy. It is strongly associated with white trees, white roots, and white leafy shards, all of which can be found throughout the world and together make up the world tree referenced by the glyph of Anemo and depicted within the afterimage menu. Everything in this image carries meaning. The tree is Engarden, and the whirlpool symbol in the center is the Sea of Souls, which flows through the tree's veins in the form of stream. Surrounding it is a sun topped with 3 prongs, representing Luca and her light. The triangular symbol encompassing both, which is later adopted by the reincarnates, indicates the continual cycle of birth, growth, and death made possible by this union between the sea and the sun. The rippling water beneath the tree may perhaps represent the infinite expanse of reality or the endless flow of time. And the single golden branch on the right side, I'll get to that later. As an aside, it is possible that Nuo masks like the one Renee carries are made from the world tree. Owl states that the mask's main material is challenging to locate and difficult to process, and apart from a few confluence trees, these areas tend to be hidden away in hard-to-reach places. Samsair says the masks are engraved with the primeval aura of Luca, and it makes sense that wood from the tree would be highly receptive to it since they are so closely associated. While much of the afterimage exists in an incorporeal form, it can naturally coalesce into objects that are also called afterimages. These can be pulled directly from the roots of the world tree or obtained from defeated beings of great power, and when injected with sufficient spiritual energy can grant the wielder unique abilities and/or properties. Renee is one of comparatively few beings who can use these natural artifacts, as stated by Owl, but at the beginning of her journey even she can only handle one at a time. Wielding more requires her to collect divine seeds from the world tree, powerful objects that can expand a being's spiritual space. Along with the afterimage, another important concept to understand about the world of Engarden is the nature and composition of life itself, which is quite different than you might expect. All living things are made up of 3 elements: body, stream, and soul. Body is straightforward, being composed of basic materials from the physical realm, but the other 2 are more complex. Let's start with stream. The term generally refers to water, the original source of life, and its purpose within a body is to provide energy. Because all water originates from the Sea of Souls, it is saturated with spiritual energy, and in its pure form is so potent that it will instantly kill on contact. For this reason, beings do not swim in Engarden. To be safely used, stream must be diluted, and the process for doing this is quite simple. Stream that comes in contact with physical matter will gradually have its energy pulled out in a process similar to osmosis, with the receiving material being refined, and this is how prism ore is formed. We learn from the column's echo that the water from the Emerald Falls is diluted enough to use for agriculture, and it is no coincidence that the field of Geo borders the falls and is teeming with this rare ore. The mountain's natural kyanite deposits had been gradually refined over centuries by the nearby water flow. This osmotic interaction occurs within living bodies as well, and when a newly deceased corpse is quickly dehydrated, the solid material left behind forms a glossy prism bone. Liquid water is by far the most common form of stream, but it can also manifest as ice, vapor, and, surprisingly, lava. Eros is careful to make a distinction between this and the other forms that energy can take, but doesn't explain how stream can take a form that isn't water-based. Thankfully, this answer is provided by the eldritch creation Gongor. The Institute of Entity discovered that Gongor had the ability to manipulate stream within living organisms and dehydrate their bodies in the same manner that prism bones were formed, effectively petrifying them. But even more interesting is that this ability could also be used to decompose stone structures. So what's the common link between stream and stone? Crystal. Since the dawn of their creation, humankind's primary source of energy had been dews, which are small spherical crystals that form when sunlight and stream combine in the clouds above. If not immediately harvested, they condense into large crystal structures over time, and we see many of these in caves and other places where water collects. Additionally, dews can be obtained directly from the bodies of living creatures, though only in small amounts. Just as crystal dews are created from stream, lava is nothing but a thick slush of crystal and volcanic gases that is equally capable of storing and transferring spiritual energy, if not more so, and plays a vital role in spreading the energy of stream throughout the world. This brings us to the third and final element of life, soul. All living beings in Engarden, animal, Goliath, and human, have souls composed of soul shards, which are spiritual crystals that exist within the soul realm. The most important and powerful of these are memory shards, which contain the very essence of you, your memories, personality, attributes, and so forth. The memory shard description states that they are the very source of soul and power, which explains why they can reside indefinitely within the Sea of Souls, and may also indicate that they are the creative force behind soul fields. In addition to being made of crystal, souls have several other distinct properties to be aware of. First, they can be separated from a body without returning to the Sea of Souls, provided there is another suitable object, a vessel, to bind them to. Many weapons, such as the Abyss Scythe and Bloodbath Blade, have human souls trapped within them, granting them some measure of power, and the same is true of machines like the Xenal Watchers and the Mechanical Ascension Jade. Second, while souls are impervious to harm from anything in the physical realm, powerful forms of soul magic can damage and even destroy them entirely. This can occur quickly when the soul shards are forcibly shattered, as is the case for Eros when she uses a forbidden incineration spell, or over a period of time as they gradually dissipate, which happens to Rosalia. The soul in these cases does not return to the Sea of Souls, but is instead scattered across the physical realm where it will become a part of other lives. The essence and memory is eternal, but the individual's identity is not. Finally, all beings possess what is known as an aura, a unique magical field that radiates out from their soul and permeates the space around them. These auras can be sensed or smelled by sufficiently powerful beings, and we see this happen time and time again. Ifri senses the Lush Wolf's aura in the Rubywood Forest, Pat can sense Ausa's aura lingering on Renee, and 42 can sense the aura of Esius in the Sunken Sanctum. The defining scent of a being's aura appears to be determined in part by emotion, and this explains why no two are exactly the same. Body, stream, and soul, the core ingredients for life, and with those now defined, let's discuss the cycle of life and death specifically as it pertains to humanity. All human souls originate from the Sea of Souls, the vast soul territory overseen by Samsair, and are officially born when a body is first built for them by the Well of Being at Holy Grounds. Upon their eventual death, a person's soul will then return to the sea and their body will dry up, wither, and finally become energy and dissipate into the world. If too much stream remains in a corpse, if it doesn't dry out fast enough, it can reanimate as an unconscious wanderer, a hollow entity driven by instinct to roam and attack anyone it can find. This is why the process of refining corpses into prism bones is so important, and we are told this was a big responsibility for mages all across Engarden. But in this world, death is not permanent. When a soul returns to the sea, they can be rebuilt again by the Well of Being and obtain another body in accordance with their memories. The reincarnates make it clear that this is not a resurrection, for the essence of the process never lies in the body, but rather in the soul. The body is simply a vessel to be discarded. Prior to the raising, some individuals who suffered severe physical ailments would even drink lethal poison, or to use its proper name, resting potion, to return their souls to the stream prematurely so that they could be rebuilt with a new, healthy body. This is the basic cycle of life and death in Engarden, and throughout human history the Well of Being continually birthed new souls and rebuilt those who had died. The process is said to have taken a few months for each soul, though it is unclear just how many souls the well could have in the works at any given time. Regardless, dues could be invested to speed up the process and strengthen the new bodies. Understandably, the well was prized by all of humanity as a gift from God, and huge crowds would form whenever someone returned from the well, each person hoping to find a familiar face. To keep track of the ever-growing population, a registry was set up at holy grounds to record the identities of the newborns and rebuilt. Eventually, however, humans grew impatient with how long the well took to rebuild and, in a series of events I'll get to shortly, learned how to build artificial wells that they called artifexes. These structures worked in a similar way, but with some big limitations. They had to be powered by a large amount of dues to function at all, and they could only rebuild the souls of those who had died, not give birth to new souls as the Well of Being could. This is likely due to the way artifexes were powered by dues alone, while the well was powered by primeval glyphs. But the artifexes came with a unique advantage as well. It was now possible, or at least much easier, to choose specifically who would be rebuilt. Once enough energy had been injected into the stream, the initiator could seek the wandering soul in the sea by speaking their name and thinking of their characteristics, and when a successful link had been made, the rebuilding process would begin. This could take anywhere from a few days to dozens of days depending on the nature of the soul and how much energy the artifacts had to work with, and even on the longer end, this was considerably faster than the Well of Being. The process was generally very reliable, but over time it was found that not everyone could be rebuilt. When attempting to rebuild those whose souls were severely damaged in battle, those who had lived long, and those who were full of experience and knowledge, the ritual would fail and waste all of the energy that had been dedicated to it. Many theories were proposed by human scholars to explain this phenomenon, but no one was able to come up with a definitive answer. Now, there is in fact a reason for this, but we'll get to that later. Instead, I want to now address what is perhaps the most peculiar thing about the wells, namely that they are said to be, time and time again, the sole factor behind the rise of human civilization and, after the raising, humanity's only hope for survival. This must mean that producing children biologically is simply not a thing in Engarden, or at the very least is quite difficult and rare, and this idea is pretty well supported by the fact that familial relations are simply never mentioned anywhere in the game. No characters ever speak of having parents, including Nicole, the only one who appears to be a child, and we learn she was on her own before being taken in as an apprentice by the Master Mage Kareen. Alice does refer to the other conjurers Doro, Mia, and Emily as her brothers and sisters, but the four of them look very different from each other, and Emily and Alice both speak of having the same master. Perhaps the master-apprentice relationship is the equivalent of parents and children in this world, or maybe Alice simply meant that she considered other conjurers her siblings due to their shared vocation. Other potential references to family are equally vague, such as the armor pieces said to be from the legendary twins, the way Madeline refers to Link simply as her beloved, and the geoglyph's epitaph, Legacy of Ancestors. Additionally, we get a clear reference to descendants in the Book of Shenlong, which strongly implies genealogical ties, but we must remember, Shenlong is from a different world altogether, so I'm not sure that counts. This topic is hazy enough that I'm hesitant to make any firm conclusions, but whatever the truth may be, we know for sure that the Wells were overwhelmingly responsible for the rise of humanity. While it's never stated how old the world of Engarden is by the time of Renee and the events of the game, we know that it has been at least a few thousand years based on the Celestial Remains description and a quest line regarding the Golden Crow. And unsurprisingly, humanity changed a great deal during this time. The ancient humans were primal, valuing physical strength above all else and remaining fiercely loyal to their tribes. They were also quite superstitious, as we learn from the Cup of Flows artifact that these ancient people used to hold rituals for rain. In time, however, humans came to understand and forge connections with the Goliaths and their scions, engaging in diplomacy, kindling friendships, and in the process gaining a greater understanding of the natural world. Most humans ultimately chose to settle in Engarden's Central Valley where they had first been given life, and as the race continued to advance, so too did their technology. Carpentry enabled them to build all kinds of structures, including the wooden elevators leading down to the first cradle, and sophisticated stonework made possible the construction of large cities both in the valley and in the Rubywood Desert far to the west. They devised and built a massive system of aqueducts and pipes to redirect water from the Emerald Falls to their fields for agriculture, and carved out mines deep in the field of Geo to obtain its valuable ore. Through the constant rebuilding of the Well of Being and their own ingenuity, humans eventually became the most numerous and active social creatures in Engarden. And they had many questions. Scholars pondered on the fact that, unlike all of Luca's other creations, humans did not receive any special powers from their well and were relatively weak in both body and soul. They were flawed, prone to making poor choices and giving in to their basest tendencies, and the wise among them even established the maxim, "To err is the being." What divine purpose did God have for such a people? For some, the answer to this question was simply to exceed their fellow beings and set themselves apart by their own power and aptitude, as ordinary beings have their limits and were no match for those born with talents. These talents took many forms. Some were blessed with unmatched physical strength, others with uncanny skill in matters of the arcane, and many of these individuals found a home in the great human capital, the Holy Grounds, so named because they were built around the venerated Well of Being. The gleaming city held something for everyone. Technological achievements, an archive so vast it became known as the Sea of Knowledge, an order of great knights led by Valo, and a religious sect of priests and master mages led by the archpriest Eisius, who reigned over the land in a form of theocracy. Holy Grounds also happened to be built directly above God's Hall where the first cradle resided, but for reasons unknown, the path down to these caverns had been sealed off in the distant past. It was eventually rediscovered by Eisius and Master Mage Levine, better known as Owl, and the two investigated the God's Hall together along with Eros and Karine. They descended the ancient wooden tunnels and were awed by the massive primeval cradle and its mysterious aura. But most importantly, they discovered the tablet, whispering in the darkness as it had for millennia. While Al was only interested in the ancient knowledge of soul spells it contained, and Eros didn't seem to feel the call of the tablet at all, Eisius heard it clearly and was shown visions of truth that pushed her human comprehension to its very limit. Following this incident, Eisius was changed. Her perspective had evolved, and she was inspired to break the secrets of life, just as Luca had so very long ago. She researched deeply into the history of the world and the nature of the Sea of Souls, and through this research eventually came to believe that Engarden was no more than a toy to Luca, and one that no longer interested her. The human race was shackled to their weak bodies, bound to the rule of their very nature, and held back from reaching their true potential. It didn't take long for Eisius to decide that, if God had abandoned humanity to a superficial paradise, then they would need to build a paradise of their own, and she herself would be the one to lead them. The archive mural found behind the crystal orb represents this turning point. You'll notice that the central figure is split down the middle, Luca on the left with her shimmering wings and light coronet, and Eisius on the right with her magical orb and gilded mask. Eisius believed it was her destiny to replace Luca. This was, of course, terribly ambitious, and the archpriest couldn't do it alone. To expand humanity's knowledge of their world and the divine rules by which it was governed, she commissioned the building of 3 institutes to research various aspects of human existence. The Institute of Consciousness, located in the subterranean sanctum with a research focus on the tablet and the nature of the human mind. The Institute of Spirit, located in the lush eastern forest with a research focus on soul energy. And the Institute of Entity, located in the dense northern forest with a research focus on souls, entities, and bodies. Eisius also established the Ode to Luca, an elite organization loosely affiliated with the Institute of Consciousness whose purpose was to seek out individuals with unusual gifts and abilities. Eros was specifically invited by Karine to be the tutor of this group, helping them cultivate their talents and determine how to make the best use of them. As she explains to Renee later, through observation and study of these unique gifts, we hoped that we would gradually reveal the secrets of our souls and discover even more possibilities to evolve humanity into true beings. This was the ultimate goal of the Ode as understood by its members, to enable the evolution of humanity into beings of stronger bodies and souls to match those of the elemental races, and this made them quite popular among the common people. Eros even says that, at its peak, the Ode was greatly revered and many wanted to join it. But this ideal for human transcendence was only the beginning of what Eisius had in mind. She knew that alone, she would only ever have the power of a human. The birth of a new god would take far more than that, the merging of every human soul in the world to create a brand new super entity, and this true goal was kept a secret from everyone in the Ode save Karine, who was eventually inducted into Eisius's plan and remained fiercely loyal to the cause. But the foundation had been laid, and Eisius even went so far as to assign each Ode member a title based on a part of the future deity: the finger, the eye, the ear, and the heart. The years passed by as these various groups conducted their allotted research until eventually the time came for the next step of Eseus's plan, one that would disrupt the balance of Engarden forever. Early on in her research, Eseus realized that she needed to learn how to build a well, since these structures provided direct access to the Sea of Souls and formed the basis of all life in Engarden. But the only beings who possessed this knowledge were those of the race of Geo, as they had been given the duty to build and repair all manner of God's sacred relics. And so, a trap was laid. Eseus invited the Goliath of Geo to holy grounds under false pretenses, only to capture her immediately when she arrived. Eseus questioned the Goliath, seeking her knowledge of the wells, and eventually resorted to harsher measures when she proved uncooperative. We don't know what these were, but physical torture and soul invasion are likely candidates, especially considering that Eseus ultimately succeeded. The secret of the wells became known to humanity for the first time, and Eseus quickly made plans for artifexes to be built all across Engarden, a decision that likely made her quite popular with the common people who had since become impatient with the Well of Being. All this raises the question though, how much did the other members of the Ode know about this plot? It truly beggars belief that Eseus could have done all this without anyone noticing, or explain how she suddenly knew how to build wells of creation shortly after the Geo-Goliath went missing. At the very least, high-ranking officials like Eros and Owl must have known what was going on, so either they approved of the plan, perhaps believing it to be for the greater good, or were simply unwilling to challenge the will of the Archpriest. This paints them in a less than flattering light, but no more so than the rest of humanity who had become corrupted by power and greed. They grew to resent the Goliaths for their divine gifts, coveting the power of their fields, and in her cunning, Eseus fanned these flames. For what she needed next was a war. There were two reasons for this. First, she needed to cripple the elemental races so they would not interfere with her plans, something she knew that, as the keepers of Engarden, they would be compelled to do. And second, to obtain control over the greatest source of energy, the stream itself. As I explained earlier, the world of Engarden was irrigated with veins to carry the stream throughout every region, each one containing a different amount of energy. While the races of Anemo, Pyro, and Geo all had powerful veins flowing within their fields, humanity had access to only the frozen veins, which possessed very little energy or value. I suspect that the echoes we find here and in the field of Pyro might actually be the memories of Eseus herself as she discreetly evaluated how the humans could obtain more energy to fuel her ever-expanding research. Now, later in the story, Eros does tell 42 that humans have no way to directly tap the energy of stream or lava, but this is probably because humans never had an opportunity to study the lava or vapor streams in the first place. Also, just because it had never been done doesn't preclude Eseus from wanting to try. After a period of preparation, and with their artifacts now in place, the time for war drew nigh. Tensions between the humans and Goliaths, which had been raised significantly ever since the kidnapping of the Geo-Goliath, finally snapped when the humans drew their blades first and launched an assault on the Albedo Tower in an attempt to seize control of the Sky Palace. We know this occurred based on the Anemo Scion Echo stating, "First they imprisoned the Goliath of Geo, then they invaded our field," along with Renee's comment to Loss that many years have passed since the humans invaded the Sky Palace. They fought with weapons specifically designed to kill Scions, imbued with magic that damaged their souls and prevented them from returning from the stream and being rebuilt. Shortly afterwards, another human force invaded the field of Pyro, swarming out of the nearby city as they attempted to claim the region for themselves. But despite all their planning, they had underestimated the power of the Pyro Goliath, Ignis. Furious at the humans' arrogance, he tore the land asunder, ripping apart their city and leaving a massive burning canyon in its place in an attempt to hold them off. Interestingly, Ifri later refers to this action as a mistake, though doesn't elaborate why. Perhaps he felt that the cost in human lives that day had been too great. For all his might, Ignis was no warmonger and simply wanted to keep the peace, not kill. But even this drastic measure was insufficient to stave off the human assault, and the canyon became a battleground. Meanwhile, the situation at the Albedo Tower became more complicated when Atomos intervened and stopped the rain, hoping to halt the humans' advance by cutting off their main energy supply of dews. The blow was felt immediately since these crystals were required to keep rebuilding their troops, and as their momentum began to wane, the humans scrambled to find a way to produce dews on their own. Master Mage Karine decided their best bet was to go to the source, and so she snuck into the Sky Palace in search of the secret behind the dews and found it in the form of the Cloudworm, a powerful hemi-Goliath that could transform stream and other forms of life into crystals. She managed to capture the creature with her magic and then made her escape, but not before paying Atomos a visit to bury her consciousness deep in a nightmare and placing a seal over her mirror of reality to block her connection to the Sea of Souls. Upon returning to the Institute of Consciousness with the Cloudworm in tow, Karine and other researchers commenced a series of experiments to try and fuse the creature with a human soul so they could control its power and produce energy crystals at will. Unfortunately, these went very badly. Every human subject they tried was devoured before a successful fusion could take place. But Eisius believed in the project and eventually decided to get personally involved. She used a powerful soul-splitting spell to separate a pure piece of her own soul to use as a host, and finally, the fusion worked. 42 was born, so named because she was the 42nd subject. It is this event commemorated in the archive mural found behind the Candelabra Hallow, which depicts Eisius holding a newborn child. What happened to 42 after this is unclear. We know that her power was tested and found to work as the researchers had hoped, but for some reason they did not yet begin using her to mass-produce energy crystals. It could be that she was simply too young to tap into her power's full potential and was thereby sent off to the Institute of Entity to develop and be studied further. We know that she lived here for some time since she later muses that half of her memories originated from the place, and the fact that she has no recollection of the Sanctum Laboratories at all must mean she had spent very little time there. Another reason why it may not have been feasible to start using 42's powers immediately is that Karine needed a way to duplicate this success in order to generate enough energy to be worthwhile, and though she came up with detailed plans to extract and refuse the Cloudworm, it was ultimately just too risky. She had no guarantee it would work, nor any real chance of replacing the Cloudworm or 42 if it failed. It certainly didn't help that Eisius had returned to her study of the Well of Being either. Without sufficient energy to continue pressing the attack, the humans' two initial engagements at the fields of Animo and Pyro had ended in stalemate, with neither side able to gain an advantage over the other. Realizing that they needed a new strategy, the human forces pulled out and regrouped at their fortress to the north, where they planned to strike at the volcano fortress Scorchware and gain access to the lava stream there. Anticipating this, Ignis formed a hemi-Goliath, the Colossus of Pyro, to guard the entrance to his homeland, and then followed north with his army. The Animo forces raced to intercept the humans as well, meeting them in battle in the mountain pass beyond the Rainbow Plains, but despite their valiance, were simply no match for the combined human forces. By the time Ignis arrived with his scions, the few remaining Animo soldiers were trapped under siege, and as he made to rescue them, the Goliath was ambushed by the humans in what Brandir later calls a despicable plot. Now utterly exhausted, his strength spent in creating both the Ashen Canyon and the Colossus of Pyro, Ignis was unable to resist the vicious attack and finally fell to the humans' blades. But death was not the end for him, as his soul was swiftly captured and taken back to Holy Grounds to be studied by the Institute of Consciousness. In his absence, the war raged on, with neither side able to gain ground. The humans had their fortress to fall back on, as well as artifacts at Resting Town and Rubywood Camp to continue rebuilding their troops, and the Pyro Scions were able to revive and reproduce endlessly on the battlefield itself. Now, at this point you may be wondering, what about the Geo Scions? You would expect them to have joined the war considering it was their Goliath who had been taken, and yet we don't find a single reference to the race of Geo participating in the war at all. We do learn from several item descriptions that the race was meek and timid with limited fighting skills, and those who did learn were considered oddballs, so it could be that they simply wouldn't have been much help. But this is somewhat contradicted by the line telling us that they had delicate machinery and powerful weapons, including artifacts that had power to control the Earth. One possible explanation is that they did participate in the war, just not on the front lines, choosing instead to forge weapons and armor for the much stronger Animo and Pyro Scions. In similar fashion, the humans' efforts also extended far beyond the battlefield, with the institutes of both Entity and Spirit working to aid the war from their forests in the east. The Institute of Entity took human casualties from the battlefield and experimented fusing their souls with other creatures, and though most of these resulted in failure with the subject's rejection of the code and subsequent mutation into grotesque monsters, it is said that many of these failed ones were returned to the battlefield and put to good use. It was during this time that the promising Subject 131, codenamed Gongor, escaped from containment and began roaming the forest. The Institute of Spirit also tried to tackle the problem of high war casualties through the fusing of souls, but their study involved machines rather than test tubes. In an ambitious attempt to emulate the Pale Warriors of the Albedo Tower, whom the humans had fought and been repelled by during their attack on the Sky Palace, the researchers sought to replace living soldiers with war machines and came up with such creations as the Xenal Crawler and Xenal Watchers. However, they quickly found that the energy cost was far greater than they had imagined, and certainly not sustainable for the prolonged war, and so they turned to the only energy source available to them in the region: the forest itself, each organism filled with the power of the stream. Through unknown means, they learned how to extract and conserve spiritual power from living beings and began draining the life out of the forest, turning its lush vegetation into dust. The massive metal spheres found just outside the Institute might have been the tools used for this, and they were so incredibly effective that eventually the entire forest was sucked dry, transformed into a vast desert. The ordinary folk who dwelt in the region had no choice but to leave, knowing the strange institute was somehow involved in the desecration of their land, but powerless to do anything about it. As the war continued without an end in sight and the toll on both sides reached unprecedented levels, Master Mage Owl decided it was time to intervene. After penning a letter to the Hydro-Goliath Samsair, he sent a crew of sailors on a special mission to cross the misty waters and deliver it, knowing full well that ships who sailed into the strange mist did not return. But times were desperate, and despite being all too aware of the risk themselves, the sailors agreed to go since they feared the Master Mage's soul-splitting power. And unfortunately, the voyage proved to be just as brutal as they had feared. The surging ocean waves and freezing cold mist caused them to lose all sense of direction, their food supplies ran low, and the intense purity of the water was lethal to those who fell, or in some cases jumped, in. Eventually, only one sailor remained, Ian, and as he waited for the end to come, Samsair took pity and sent one of her scions, referred to simply as the Servant, to rescue him. He awoke in the paradise of the Field of Hydro, healed of his injuries, but when he showed Samsair the letter and told her of Owl's request, she promptly rejected it. We don't know exactly what the letter said, but it was likely a petition for Samsair to intervene in the conflict, not necessarily to side with the humans, but rather to help mediate a resolution. And while this is admittedly speculation, I would hazard a guess that Easius was not aware of the mission at all, even if the sailors seemed to believe that she was. Owl was powerful enough to conceivably go behind her back, and considering her plans, the Goliath of Hydro seems like the last being Easius would want to get involved in the affairs of humanity anyways. Unfortunately, the mission had been doomed from the start, as Samsair had already made her decision long before the letter reached her. She knew of all things happening within the reach of the streams and was doubtless watching the war unfold, but, as she later tells 42, she does not intervene with the flow of the world unless compelled. Disheartened, Ian had no choice but to leave this newfound paradise and sail home empty-handed, aided by a special lantern that drove away the mist and calmed the waves to grant him safe passage back over the perilous sea. He dreaded the thought of facing the Master Mage alone, resigned to his fate as the bearer of bad news. Little did he know it was too late. Back on the mainland, Owl had not been the only one to decide it was time for drastic measures. Seeing humanity's chances of winning the war grow ever more distant, Easius moved ahead with her secret plans, channeling her most powerful magic to force open a passage between the Well of Being and the Sea of Souls. Her intent was to harness the sea's power for herself, but she gravely underestimated just how much power it held, and her spell backfired spectacularly. The sea was only ever intended to exist in the Soul Realm, and so the colossal force contained within exploded out of the passage and manifested as a raging flood that swept over holy ground and much of the world, leaving utter destruction in its wake: the Raising. We read of the flood having two separate impacts, the second of which Ifri refers to as an aftershock, which could mean that it functioned much like a tsunami. The first wave radiated outward from the Well of Being, and then when it ran out of momentum, it was sucked back to the center, dragging everything with it. This explanation is loosely supported by Owl's statement that the flood's powerful force could not be sustained for long in the mortal realm, and so eventually it receded, carrying the remaining people with it. Of course, it did leave behind a vast lake in the physical realm that came to be known as the Teardrop, so not all of the water returned to its origin. While the physical destruction of the flood was bad enough, it paled in comparison to the destruction it brought upon its many victims. Regarding those carried away by the flood, Owl says that most beings could not resist such a terrible sundering. Their souls were not destined to survive in that realm. This suggests humans swept away by the flood were not returned to the stream and Sea of Souls because their souls were actually destroyed, shattered beyond recognition, and this could be what is meant by the intro cinematic line, "Souls once flowing in the stream are now lost beyond." The raising was a truly apocalyptic event that the world was not prepared for, and things would never be the same. There were survivors, however. Beings with exceptionally powerful souls were able to resist the overwhelming flood with varying success, including Owl, Kareen, the First Knight Valo, and even the Judicator Knights. Well, sort of. Their souls were still ripped out of their bodies, but remained somewhat intact, and were thus able to drive their detached bodies with more purpose than that of a wanderer. Despite having been reduced to only his soul, Ignis also survived the first impact due to his nature as a Goliath, and used the chaos and destruction to escape the Institute of Consciousness and make his way back to the surface. And this is where he found Eros and Renee, the latter of whom was unconscious on the Holy Ground's lawn in critical condition. Her soul had been badly broken by the flood's debilitating strike. More specifically, her memory crystal had been fractured, its pieces scattered throughout Engarden by the Great Wave. What happened next is told in the Archive's flashback sequence. Seeing an opportunity to stabilize himself and save another, albeit an enemy, Ignis decided to cast a primeval soul link spell to tether his soul with Renee's. The link held, and though the shock it had on her severely weakened soul would further fade her memories and induce a short coma, she was safe. At least for the moment. Ifri, who chose for himself a new name to match his new body, knew they were not out of danger yet, for the raging flood would soon return. Taking a piece of Renee's broken mask, he used up the last vestiges of his primeval power to create the Hemi-Goliath Talos, a being born with only the concept of protection, which shielded all three of them from the flood's second impact. It's not entirely clear how far the floodwaters spread across Engarden, but whether or not they reached the Goliath Fall Pass, the war came to an abrupt end. Human civilization was dealt an irreversible blow, its population and resources washed away along with their leadership, and what was left of their military crumbled. Even their fearless archpriest herself had fallen, leaving them to face the broken world alone. Or so they thought. Despite being hit by the full force of the stream at ground zero, Isius did manage to survive, though at a high cost. Her body and soul became intertwined together and washed into the Sea of Souls, where she was trapped indefinitely. But with unfaltering determination and newly discovered power in the very origin of soul itself, she carefully plotted her return. Between both the war and subsequent raising, the vast majority of humanity had been wiped out, and those who were left did their best to pick up the pieces of their former lives. For most, this entailed congregating in the western towns and villages that remained intact, including Rubywood Village, the northern village adjacent to Scorchware, and Resting Town on the Rainbow Plains. Each of these settlements was led by a master mage who could provide guidance and protection, and was also built around an artifacts. Now that the Well of Being was gone, these artificial wells provided the only way for humans to be rebuilt, and as such were more valuable than ever. But not everyone was lucky enough to make it to these relatively well-off settlements. Some humans still lived far to the east, and we learned that widespread food shortages resulting from the loss of so much farmland caused people to venture into the Whispering Forest in search of food there, despite the rumors of monsters. The rumors were true, of course, as nearly all the test subjects of the Institute of Entity had escaped as a result of the raising and made the forest a much more dangerous place to be. The situation was very similar at the Institute of Spirit. Only 2.5 months after the raising cut off the facility from its power supply in Holy Grounds, the facility had lost control of 75% of its mechanical subjects and could no longer function. And this is how things would remain, as there was simply no one left to run the institutes anymore. The post-raising situation at large is aptly described in the game's opening as a deafening silence, for all but the race of Hydro had experienced tremendous loss. The human Holy Grounds had been reduced to a giant lake, the Goliaths of Pyro and Geo were missing, and the rain never returned since Atomos was still cut off from the Sea of Souls and trapped in a nightmare. The Animo Scions she birthed to replace the legions she had lost were merely empty shells devoid of souls, and without their power to combine sunlight with stream, dews could no longer be formed. The stream still flowed, of course, which kept the land and its creatures alive, but there was very little energy to be used for rebuilding humans from artifacts. With her home now underwater and previous responsibilities obsolete, Eros decided to leave Holy Grounds and settle in the remote Rubywood village, where she took on the role of resident master mage and trained Renee as her apprentice. a fresh start for the girl who had lost all her memories. Now, it's important to understand that this Renee, White Renee if you will, was a completely different person than the one who lived prior to the raising. Losing her memory shards to the flood did not just give her amnesia, but altered the very identity of her soul. As Eros explains to her later at the Well of Hydro, you are a complete, separate soul. You are neither a sliver of the old you, nor an extension of her. And while we know next to nothing about the original Renee and what her personality or worldview might have been, we do get a small clue in Renee's early flashback in which Eros assures her, "You would have loved the way we live now." Apparently, a quiet, unassuming life in the small village would have appealed to her. For Eros, however, this life in Rubywood was only part-time as, unbeknownst to Renee, she continued to investigate the cause of the raising and search for surviving members of the Ode, using a secret base among the Teardrop Islands as her center of operations. But neither she nor Owl could figure out what had caused the calamity. She had more luck with the second endeavor and was able to find multiple Ode members who had survived. But something was wrong. Each one seemed to have gone mad, either running from her or attacking on sight, and it was only after capturing the Eye and studying his soul that she realized it had been corrupted by the Marionette Curse. She likely never would have guessed that the perpetrator was the former Archpriest herself. The raising had been a major blow to Eseus's plans and presented two unique problems that needed to be solved. First, Eseus was trapped in the soul realm and no longer able to act within the physical realm directly, and second, her body had been compromised, intertwined as it was with her soul, which meant she was no longer a suitable vessel for the new god. To solve the first problem, Eseus and Karine, who was still unfailingly loyal to the Archpriest and powerful enough to communicate with her between realms, began planning a second raising from the Well of Anemo. The idea was that, if another passage like that at the Well of Being could be forced open, Eseus would be able to escape in the ensuing flood. The ramifications of such an event are heavy indeed. If the Albedo Tower fell, it would break the cycle of stream and bring about a veritable extinction event as the entire world dried out to resemble the forest foregone. But getting another raising to happen at all would require a great deal of energy, more than Karine possessed, and dews were scarce in the absence of rain. So she devised a cunning plan. Disguising her voice as that of Atomos, Karine convinced the Anemo Guard Lost to hunt down humans and sacrifice their souls for stream energy with the promise that activating the well would wake the Goliath from her troubled sleep. Desperate to bring back his master and deeply resentful of humanity after the Sky Palace invasion, the Scion fell for this immediately and got to work capturing humans from the land below. On a related note, we read in one of Karine's echoes that she needed to make a perfect replica of Holy Ground's magic system in order for the ritual to work. Now, I don't think this means a magic system in the broad sense, but rather the specific magic ritual they used at Holy Grounds. While we never actually see Eseus casting the spell in-game, the closest we get is the immediate aftermath. One of the first teaser trailers for Afterimage has an extra cinematic shot depicting this very moment. Eseus is shown standing on a giant stone dais in front of the Well of Being with 9 other individuals placed at careful intervals around a circular decagram, and powerful energy can be seen crackling at its very center. It is possible that opening a passage through the well requires the sacrifice of souls, and this could be why Karine needed humans to be harvested specifically. Of course, this must be taken with a grain of salt since the developers chose not to include it in the final game, but I think it's a useful reference all the same. While it's possible they removed the scene because it was no longer accurate, it could just as likely be because it gave away too much about the story's central mystery. To solve the second problem posed by her situation, that of her body and soul being intertwined, Eseus devised the Essential Project as a way to select and prepare a vessel for her to possess once she escaped the Sea of Souls. There were only 2 suitable candidates, Subject 42, the Fused Child, and Renee, the Heart of the Ode. Both came with a unique set of challenges, but Renee would be altogether more tricky to prepare now that her soul was scattered across the world, each of its pieces containing only a fraction of her former power and, more importantly, now immune to Eseus's influence, for reasons I'll get to in a moment. To restore Renee's suitability as a vessel, she would need to be put back together again, and there was no one better suited for this task than Guider, the Shadow Moon. Of all the many characters in Afterimage, she is perhaps the most mysterious and intriguing. Regarding her background, we are simply told she believed one day a light brighter than the sun would shine over the whole world, and wished to lead the flow of the world to this eventual outcome. We also know that she is remarkably powerful. Aside from practicing a brilliant and powerful sword art unlike any other, she is uniquely capable of traveling between the physical and soul realms at will using special portals, and is even able to escape the power of the Cloud Worm with ease. And while she appears to be human, her unveiled form suggests this could just be an appearance, as is the case with the ferryman of the lava stream. Her true identity is never revealed, but she has one telling characteristic that may reveal it: her association with the moon. Great statues of Luca can be found all across Engarden, and many of these are surrounded by strange hooded figures bearing lunar symbols on their scepters. These figures are especially prominent at the first cradle, which seems to indicate they are very ancient and important, and makes it all the more odd that they don't seem to factor into the story at all. Unless, of course, they do. My theory is that the Guider is the last of the Lunar Servants, a group of powerful beings that served Luca as her angels or heralds. They had been with the goddess at the dawn of creation, perhaps even assisting in her divine work, and were given some degree of stewardship over the world. But at some point, perhaps after Luca disappeared, things changed. One such individual turned away from the track laid before her, choosing to hide herself behind the dim moonlight and pursue her own vision of what Engarden could be. Assuming this to be true, we must then ask, what happened to the other lunar servants? While it's possible they still exist and we just never see them, I don't think that's the case. Rather, the Guider personally killed them off one by one to purge what she saw as an obsolete faith. We learn that her sword Bleak Moon was the origin of the moonlight blades that members of the Ode to Luca carry, and their description is as follows. Holding in hand, it reminds you of a certain sword skill about moonlight, followed by more blurred, shattered pieces of memories. Perhaps these swords once belonged to the other lunar servants, and these memories represent the final moments of their owners as their souls were shattered by the rogue Shadow Moon. Taken in this context, it is quite fitting that the weapons would later be gifted to the Ode, as the Guider saw them as the new organization who would lead the world. Whatever the case may be, she did pledge her loyalty to Eisius, and after the raising took upon herself the responsibility of seeking out, reconstructing, and guiding the Essential. But this would take time, and as Eisius continued to drift within the Sea of Souls, she turned her attention to the rest of the world. It, too, would need to be prepared for her coming. From her unique position in the very origin of Soul, she reached out through the stream, her power coursing through the veins of the world and corrupting it like a virus. Wanderers began to form more frequently in all parts of the land, the stream-imbued prism-bone guards of the resting path grew hostile towards humans, dangerous aquatic creatures began to spawn from the column's broken pipes, and water flowing through the Albedo Tower's central axis became dark and turbid, corrupting the tower's feathered guardians. Eisius was also able to twist the minds and souls of specific individuals who came in contact with the streams, such as the knight Izots, whose sword description says that he vowed his life to that sacred scorching flame and turned into a cold-blooded executioner for her beliefs. More importantly, she located each surviving Ode member and ensnared their souls, leaving hollow puppets in their place that she could control. Surprisingly, Eros was completely unaffected by this. Either she never gave Eisius an opportunity to seize her soul, or perhaps her soul was simply powerful enough to resist any such attempt. Renee was also unaffected, but for a very different reason: her resonant bond. Research data from the Institute of Entity informs us how resonance work. When for some reason a memory is split, and two or more of the memories are independently rebuilt into new lives, these lives are collectively called resonants. The souls of the resonants are themselves produced from the different fragments of the isogenous memory. They can sense each other due to the connection between their consciousnesses, and will passively correct each other's consciousness and check their safety. If a resonating soul is to be controlled, the controller will have to control all his or her resonants simultaneously. Therefore, resonants are naturally highly resistant to the invasion from the external. After Renee's memory shards had been scattered across Engarden by the Raising, two of them were built into new lives by local artifexes, resulting in the birth of two essentially newborn souls who resonated in harmony with each other, with the shard left in the original body, and, to some extent, with other memory shards that remained isolated. For Eisius to take control of Renee's soul and use her as a vessel, she would need to control every resonant at the same time, and this is why the Essential project was so, well, essential. The first resonant, whom I will refer to simply as Red Renee, had the misfortune of being rebuilt in the Whispering Forest where there was little food and many dangers. She was left to fend for herself, subsisting at the brink of starvation and living in constant fear of those stronger than her, and was even killed at least once, since she later remarks, "Not even death could free me from such terror." This continued for some time until one day she retrieved a lost memory shard while scavenging for dues and was shortly thereafter found by the guider. Though disappointed by the girl's sorry state, she saw in this resonant the potential for greatness and convinced her to absorb the memory shard. Likely unaware of how dangerous it was, the girl did so and immediately experienced a new surge of memory as the soul fragment merged with her own. She remembered her name, her magical abilities, and recalled rudimentary knowledge of the Ode and Institute of Entity. And she now knew what she wanted: to become the great and mighty being promised by the guider, a perfect vessel who would never again live in fear. The second resonant was named Avesia, and we know very little of her background besides her name. Red Renee says that she had lived a life of peace, and Avesia makes mention of living better before, which seemed to suggest she had been rebuilt someplace other than the Whispering Forest. The northern village by Scorchware is a possibility since we know at least one of the resonants was seen there by Pompeii. But this doesn't quite add up based on other pieces of evidence. White Renee later runs into Avesia at the Whispering Forest, Red Renee makes reference to a resonant being experimented on at the Institute, and Avesia clearly remembered the lab's unique reagent to stabilize her soul. These details imply that Avesia was rebuilt in the Whispering Forest and lived at the Institute of Entity, where she was treated well by the researchers there as they studied her unique properties, and she only chose to leave once Red Renee showed up hunting her. While this would explain why the Institute has such detailed information on resonance, there is one glaring problem here. Avesia and Red Renee could only have been rebuilt after the raising occurred, since this is when Renee's memory shards were scattered, but elsewhere we read that the Institute of Entity had long become ruins in the forest ever since the raising. The floodwaters must have reached the Whispering Forest for memory shards to be deposited there, and all the researchers Renee finds at the facility are now grotesque monsters, so it appears the raising did indeed wipe the place out. And without researchers, it would of course been impossible to conduct any more studies on resonance or anything else. What's more, Red Renee writes of rain falling in the forest and searching for leftover dews, which is truly confounding since we know that the rain did not return after the raising. This is perhaps the biggest chronological discrepancy in Afterimage, and one that I'm not quite sure how to reconcile. For the time being, let's just say that Meditator 01 conducted this research on Avesia, and water droplets falling from the Albedo Tower stream current created an effect similar to rain. Anyways, as Isius continued to spread her corrupting influence throughout Engarden, one location in particular drew her attention. A human settlement nestled at the foot of the mountains, a desolate place where fierce monsters roamed and few natural resources were to be found. And though it may seem odd for anyone to have stayed here when better conditions were to be found elsewhere, we must remember that crossing over the Emerald Falls or passing through the Halcyon Veins were arduous and dangerous undertakings in their own right. The story of this town starts with the Reincarnates, an organization who studied the mechanism of rebuilding and dedicated themselves to improving humanity's post-raising condition by rebuilding people who were truly talented and virtuous. One such individual to be rebuilt was Aus, a powerful mage who had previously been killed in some unknown accident, and after being given the second chance she headed west toward the Emerald Falls, where she came across the sorry town. Taking pity on it and wishing to help the people there, Aus chose to stay and lead them as their master mage. But there was only so much she could do, and their destitution had made them vulnerable. Rosalia tells Renee what happened next. This town never had many natural resources. Master Mage Aus showed us how to scrape by. We suffered, but we survived. God, however, couldn't bear to see us suffer, so she chose her messengers and brought us gifts. She graced the commoners with the ability to cast powerful spells so that they could keep the fierce monsters at bay and endure the harsh environment. Rosalia then explains that only Aus and her apostles were able to hear God's voice, and that she, as well as the other villagers, did not know exactly what the voices said. All she knew was that, eventually, Aus was taught the Ritual of Ascendancy, a ritual based on the power of the artifacts that would separate the people's souls from their bodies and thereby free them from physical suffering, allowing them to embrace true salvation and freedom. It's pretty easy to see what was going on here. In an attempt to win the people's trust and convince them to follow her, Isius sent her ode puppets to the town with magical artifacts that greatly improved the living conditions of its inhabitants. She then provided them with enchanted documents through which she could whisper, teaching them to fear death and the inevitable return to the Sea of Souls, and instead presenting a new option: to transcend their human state, leaving behind their bodies and achieving true freedom by merging into one being. At length, Aus and her many loyal followers among the townspeople were convinced of the truth of these teachings, and the town became known throughout other regions as the home of an apostate cult, a group who had exiled themselves through their blasphemy. Such criticism notwithstanding, Aus and the townsfolk remained faithful and decided to go through with the proposed ritual. Preparations were made, and when the fateful night arrived, Aus commenced the ritual within the walls of her own home. But things went terribly wrong. Unbeknownst to Aus, her assistant Pat was suspicious of the Heavenly Voice's intent and also eager to claim their power for himself, and partway through the ritual he intentionally sabotaged it by destroying the artifacts. Or rather, a piece of it, since the main structure clearly remains intact. Aus was unable to maintain the ritual under her own power, and so it collapsed, tearing the souls of every living creature from their bodies and corrupting most into vile, twisted spirits who lost their minds and had no choice but to wander. Only a few were lucky enough to retain a semblance of their previous self, and the innkeeper Rosalia seems to be the only one who truly kept her sanity. None could escape the confines of the town either, as a magical barrier lingered that crushed any spirit who tried to do so. Unfortunately, there would be no relief for this ill-fated town. Not from their fellow men, nor from their false god, for in the wake of their failure, Isius simply turned away. We now arrive at where the game officially begins. The story of Afterimage can definitely be a little hard to follow as you play through the game for the first time, not because of how it was written, but rather how it is structured. The game features not one, but two protagonists on parallel journeys that intersect at key points. Experiencing both sides of the story is necessary to fully grasp what is going on, but because the second is only revealed once you've basically completed the first, it feels like you're always one step behind. And nowhere is this more true than the game's opening in Rubywood. To understand the important event about to take place here, we must first turn our attention to Subject 42, who had survived the raising several years earlier at the Institute of Entity and been endlessly tortured by the demon inside her ever since. Though she had successfully merged with the Cloudworm and gained its power at the time of her birth, the cost was immense. She could not sustain herself with regular food or dews, instead needing to periodically consume other human souls. If she tried to resist the hunger, the Cloudworm would eventually take complete control and turn her into an unstoppable monster that would wreak even greater destruction, and even a desperate attempt at suicide was unable to break her out of this predicament. Surprisingly, during her time at the Institute, she had never actually been informed as to the manner of her creation and the source of her power, so she came to believe that she had been cursed and that the Cloudworm was a part of her own soul. As soon as she was free, 42 immediately set out to find a way to break this curse, her journey eventually leading her to the Reincarnate's base on the Silent Coast. They were able to offer her no answers, but did have a fresh lead. They suggested she seek out the Master Mage Eros, who used to be a highly ranked mage at Holy Grounds and was therefore likely to know something about 42's inception. Now choosing to conceal her identity with an illusory cloak bearing the Reincarnate's emblem, 42 makes her way to Eros's hidden teardrop base only to find that the Master Mage had recently left. Eros had been persistently tracking members of the Ode and managed to capture one, the individual known as the Eye, before receiving an odd message from the Finger to meet him at the Rainbow Plains Pass. Deciding to poke around the base a bit longer, 42 finds one of Renee's memory shards that Eros had carefully stowed away, and not a moment too soon, for Red Renee emerges and attacks her in order to get it. But 42 defeats her easily and, now realizing that Eros is likely in danger, departs with haste to try and intercept her. But the danger was far greater than that of a single Ode puppet. Years before, when Ignis had linked his soul with Renee on the Holy Grounds lawn, he unknowingly disrupted the functioning of the Molten Sanctum, the birthplace of Goliaths. The cradle had been designed to produce new Goliaths if any were to die, so that there would always be one for each element at a time, and as such it monitored their souls. If a Goliath soul and accompanying heart returned to the stream, then it was time for a new Goliath to be born. Unfortunately, the Soul Link spell transformed Ignis' soul into a novel form that caused his heart to vanish from the Molten Sanctum's site entirely, and this caused it to birth two new Goliaths instead of one, neither of whom had a heart. This was a big deal because, as Ifri explains to Renee, the heart is the source of the Goliath's power and authority, but it is also engraved with the duties given by God. The meaning of our existence is to do God's work in the first place. Only with the heart can we fully understand what Luca's and Garden should be and how to properly guard it. Deprived of this essential characteristic, the newborn Goliaths Aegis and Akil lacked guidance and restraint from God and had a warped vision of their duties. Angry with humanity for bringing such devastating war to their world, they determined to annihilate all remaining humans, believing that only then could peace truly be restored to Engarden. Their reasoning was extreme, but not entirely unfounded. As stated by Aegis, humanity had tried plundering everything to the corners of the world to indulge their greed, and if they would go so far as to blow up their own well, then who was to say they would not bring greater and irreparable harm in the future? So, over the next few years, preparations were made. Aegis went north to direct their forces at the Volcano Fortress, and Akil merged himself with the Well of Pyro so that all rebuilt scions would have twisted bodies as well, becoming fused with each other in grotesque ways and adopting the savage mindset of their new Goliaths. They also began to melt down weak members of their race in the well and rebuild other, stronger warriors, an awful act that resulted in the creation of shadows to wander their fields. After 5 years of this restructuring, the race of Pyro barely resembled the proud, honorable warriors they used to be, and the eve of a new war had drawn nigh. They first attacked the northern village where Pompeii served as Master Mage, an obvious choice due to its close proximity to Scorchware, and what followed was nothing short of a massacre. The Scions struck without warning, overwhelming the small village through sheer numbers and slaughtering its inhabitants with iron and flame. Pompeii was mortally wounded, but managed to write a letter to Eros with a warning that her village might be next. Eros found this letter when she met up with the Finger at Rainbow Plains, which may imply it was intercepted by the Ode and being used as bait, and was unprepared for the sudden strike that followed. The Ode member attacked her, and though he was no match for a Master Mage, still managed to land a serious blow. Now dealing with this injury, Eros hurried back to Rubywood, but she was too late. The village had already been overrun by the Pyro army, its magical protection circle insufficient to stop a full assault of this magnitude. Desperate to do something to save anyone who might be left, she decided to cast a forbidden but powerful spell that would incinerate her own soul. Meanwhile, Renee and Ifri were out on patrol, seeking out wanderers and putting them to rest to keep the village safe while Eros was away. Unaware of the invasion, they stumbled right into the path of the Lush Wolf and were killed almost immediately by it, which would have been the end for them both had it not been for Renee's gift. She no longer remembered it, and curiously, Eros never told her exactly what it was, so it was with considerable surprise that Renee found herself rebuilt at the confluence just south of the village. Nor was she the only one. 42 had witnessed this rebuilding as well, having only just arrived in Rubywood after previously finding the corpse and letter Eros had left behind at the Rainbow Plains. The following exchange is brief but significant. 42 recognizes Renee as a powerful member of the Ode, but after learning of her memory loss, warns her to stay away from its other members before racing off to find Eros. This warning, of course, doesn't mean anything to Renee yet, and she is far more affected by being so close to one of her memory shards. She tells Ifri, "I felt a familiar feeling in her. A voice sounds in my head, but it isn't clear to me." They head in pursuit of this mysterious cloaked figure and finally reach the edge of the village and witness the burning remains of what had been their home. By this point, 42 had already found Eros further in, her condition rapidly deteriorating. Her spell appears to have worked in driving away most of the monstrous scions, but it came much too late. We never meet a single Rubywood survivor in the entire game, which strongly implies that there may not have been any at all. And the price for Eros was high: complete dissipation of her soul. As a last resort, 42 offers to crystallize the Master Mage's soul in an attempt to save it, and Eros, seeing 42's true and genuine face behind her illusion, chooses to trust her and accepts. Unfortunately, Renee misses this conversation and arrives at the scene just in time to find 42 extracting and crystallizing her master's soul, a bona fide "I promise this is not what it looks like" moment. Understandably upset, she attacks 42 in an attempt to break the spell, but is unsuccessful and can only watch as the stranger carries Eros away. This functions as the story's inciting incident, and much of the game revolves around 42's efforts to rebuild Eros while Renee tries to catch up to 42. Recognizing that Eros' soul is still intact, Renee and Ifri follow 42 east toward the resting town to try and apprehend her there, but on their way through Rainbow Plains are stopped by the guider. She appears to have been searching out more resonance to determine their viability, and after testing Renee in a bout of combat, reprimands her for being weak, leaving the vague warning, "Don't let her down." They arrive at the town shortly after and ask around for any information regarding the cloaked stranger, but there is none to be found. 42 had deliberately given the town a wide berth so as to avoid drawing attention, and instead headed straight for the artifacts deep below the resting path. She successfully links her consciousness to the device and fills it with energy, but just before unlocking the crystal vessel, she senses a horde of strange spiritual entities reaching out from the stream and trying to force it open themselves. These could very well be enslaved souls that Eisius was using as her minions, harnessing their power in the stream to overwhelm 42 and claim Eros' soul for herself. It's worth noting that this was a targeted attempt, not just incidental, since other humans had been using this artifact without issue. In all likelihood, this is where Nicole herself was rebuilt. But Eros was no ordinary human, and her relentless pursuit of the ode had drawn Eisius' fixed attention. Acting quickly, 42 manages to sever the link in time and decides it is too risky to attempt rebuilding Eros at these artificial wells, which leaves her with only one real option: the Well of Hydro. Though 42 does not linger here, the failed ritual continued to attract attention, and not just from the spiritual realm. Master Mage Ripe sensed Eros' aura at the artifacts and came to investigate as well, and is found there a short time later by Renee. Though unable to offer much aid, Ripe identifies the triangular emblem on 42's cloak, which Renee describes to him as perhaps belonging to the reincarnates, and suggests they seek out the organization's stronghold in the Far East. But getting there would be no small feat, and required that they first pass through the mountains, the field of Geo. Once a great mine filled with industrious humans and Geo-scions, the field had sat largely abandoned since the razing and was now home to bandits, semi-sentient mushrooms, and small herds of mountain goats. Making their way up the rocky cliffs, Renee and Ifri rescue the merchant Tark from a landslide, bounce on a friendly mushroom, and eventually find the Geo-scion Roku near the peak. He is quite wary of humans, for good reason, but nevertheless warns Renee to stay away from the Gate of Geo for her own safety. Roku explains that after the razing occurred, this gate had mysteriously closed, and none of the Geo Sentinels had been able to open it in the years following. Until recently. Their captain managed to repair the gate's hinges and open it slightly, but this released a strange black mist that enshrouded many of the Scions, and Roku recalls that he felt an evil force grip their souls and turn them into thralls. Driven completely mad, they viciously attacked their unaffected comrades, and all but Roku were killed. These mad scions continued to roam through the caverns, including Captain Hill, whom Renee confronts and kills to put his tortured soul to rest. Renee and Ifri next travel through the Emerald Falls, where they confront Lost the Galefeather for the first time and rescue Martin, the resting town blacksmith, who had been captured by the Animo Scion but managed to avoid being sacrificed due to a magical charm Ripe had given him. They descend through each layer of the jungle, working their way to the foot of the mountains where they enter the town of the Exiled and defeat Master Mage Aus. What's left of her, that is. This is witnessed by the ghost Rosalia, who reveals herself to them and explains what happened to the town. Following this, the dauntless travelers climb up into the nearby columns and find Aus's assistant Pat, who explains his side of the story and gives Renee a mysterious rod. It is roughly around this time that 42 makes it to the western Teardrop shoreline, where she realizes that Eros is in bad shape. Her soul had been destabilized by the interrupted attempt to rebuild at the resting well, and exposure to the aura of Pyro while passing through the Ashen Canyon had weakened it further. Worried she will not survive their trip to the Field of Hydro in this state, 42 decides to return to the Institutes of Entity and Spirit first and strengthen Eros' soul with specific materials that can be found there. Her first stop is at the Institute of Entity in the Whispering Forest, where she hopes to find reagent number 4, a powerful compound used for stabilizing souls when they are merged or rebuilt. But the substance turns out to be in higher demand than she expected. Once again, she runs into Red Renee, who needs reagent number 4 to stabilize her absorption of memory shards and resonance. Despite her sound defeat by 42 on the island earlier, Renee remains confident that she can surpass her and become the perfect choice for the Essential, though 42 doesn't quite know what this means yet. And Red Renee has a trick up her sleeve this time. Reagent number 11. She douses 42 with the chemical, which weakens her restraining device on the Cloudworm and causes it to awaken. And this is when Renee and Ifri arrive. They catch a brief glimpse of the monster, not knowing it is 42. With great effort, 42 manages to regain control, and even in her weakened state is able to defeat Red Renee again. While Renee and Ifri were unaware of this fight happening beneath their feet, it did not go unnoticed by Avicia, who had been attacked by Red Renee earlier and only managed to protect her soul from being absorbed by using a dose of reagent for herself. She uses the opportunity granted by 42's appearance to make her way out of the Institute, only to run right into Renee. Mistaking her for Red Renee, Avicia quickly darts away before they have a chance to talk, and Renee is left with lingering voices in her head. She and Ifri continue to investigate the Institute, and by following a mysterious voice are able to find Meditator 00, the artificial intelligence who used to run the facility. Grateful to the duo for helping it regain consciousness, the Meditator tells them everything it knows, including details regarding the Institute's research on resonance and the information that 42 had recently passed through the facility. Now knowing they are on the right track, Renee and Ifri use the nearby portal to travel east to the Institute of Spirit in the Forest Foregone, where 42 had already obtained the second item she needed, a special prism bone vessel to hold Eros' soul in place of 42's makeshift crystal. She begins to leave the facility, but is suddenly confronted by a soulless member of the Ode, possibly the Ear. Isius speaks directly through her to 42, telling of her plan to create a new world made for beings and beings alone, and cryptically refers to 42 as her child. Confused and desperate for answers, 42 quickly overwhelms the Ode and tries to devour her soul, but finds just an empty husk. Nothing resides in her soul field except the faint, lingering image of a dark underground lake, the Well of Animo deep within Nigredo Tower. It appears as though this whole encounter was engineered by Isius specifically to plant this location in 42's mind and start her on the path to finding it. As luck would have it, this just so happens to be the moment Renee and Ifri arrive. Yet another "I promise this is not what it looks like" moment for the beleaguered 42. Worse yet, her attempt to devour a soul had weakened her grip on the Cloudworm, and it is able to emerge in full fury. Renee recognizes it as the monster they had seen previously at the Institute of Entity and promptly attacks, but is no match for the Hemi-Goliath and is killed shortly after 42 warns her to stay away. As usual, she is rebuilt at a nearby confluence, but the process takes much longer this time because her soul had been briefly trapped by the effect of the crystals. From here, let us now briefly return to Avesia. Following her run-in with Renee at the Whispering Forest, she headed west to the Field of Geo, her memories shaken. On one of her notebook pages, she recalls hearing voices and seeing visions of her past, though she ultimately pushes back against these foreign memories and reasserts her identity as Avesia. She continued on through the mountains and into the Goliath Fall Pass, a desolate place where she nonetheless chose to try and live, believing she would be safe from Red Renee there. But unfortunately, this was not to be. We learn from the Institute of Entities research that resonance possessed the ability to sense each other, and it appears that Red Renee had honed this skill to become a formidable tracker of other resonance and memory shards. She and the Guider came to Goliath Fall and hunted Avesia tirelessly, forcing her to move from one hideout to another, barely able to stay ahead, until finally she was too exhausted to run any longer. Her notebook abruptly ends. She was caught and absorbed by Red Renee, who was drawing ever closer to realizing her full potential as the Essential. But 42 was making progress toward this goal as well, albeit unwittingly. After leaving a letter for Renee at the Reincarnate's base, she flies across the ocean to the Field of Hydro. It would appear that the Cloudworm's power prevented the mist from affecting her sense of direction, or perhaps she had been able to circumvent the mist entirely. And with a proper prism vessel and the stabilizing reagent, Samsair is able to rebuild Eros, a human, from the Well of Hydro. This was quite unprecedented, and it appears as though Samsair was only persuaded into helping 42 due to her connection with the Reincarnates, with whom the Goliath was on good terms. After explaining to Eros how she came to be at the Well of Hydro and confirming that the Master Mage did indeed know of her, 42 is finally able to get some answers. Eros was not directly involved with the experiment leading to 42, but is still able to tell her the purpose and general manner of her creation, as well as break the news that her soul is bound to an immensely powerful demon. She suggests the girl visit God's Hall beneath Holy Grounds to see the labs in question and look for more information there, including whether her creator Kareen is still alive. 42 thanks Eros for her help and informs her of Renee and Ifri's imminent arrival, after which she drops to the well below and speaks to Samsair, fully expecting to owe her a favor. But instead, the Goliath is quite cryptic. Despite knowing full well that 42 is a part of Isius, she chooses not to share this information, instead suggesting she may yet change the flow of the world and advising the girl not to fight her current. These words still lingering in her mind, 42 takes her leave and crosses the misty waters once more, hopeful that more answers are yet to be found buried beneath the Teardrop Lake. It is quite possible that she passed by not all too far from Renee herself, who had by this point made it to the Silent Coast and received 42's letter from the Reincarnate's receptionist, which simply said that Eros could be found at the Well of Hydro. Descending to the shores of the misty waters, they find a single ship and a ghostly sailor willing to give them passage. Ian, the very same who had made the trip years earlier for Owl. There is one big problem, however. They can only make it through the mist if the ship's lantern is lit by a Goliath, and it had gone out after the first voyage. Ifri doesn't think twice. With a simple spell, he lights it, and after a long voyage through the dark waters, they arrive at the Field of Hydro. After years of waiting, Ian had finally returned to his paradise. Renee and Ifri find Eros at the well, still recovering, and both parties are relieved to see the other safe and sound. But much has changed since their quiet days in Rubywood, including Renee herself. Realizing that she can no longer shelter Renee from her role in the fate of their world, Eros tells her everything she knows, including information about the Ode to Luca as it existed prior to the raising, the strange state of its remaining members, and how Renee is in grave danger due to her unparalleled gift. She then gives Renee one of her memory shards, the same one that 42 had taken from the teardrop base and must have given back to Eros once she had been rebuilt. And then she offers some guidance. First, she tells Renee to find Owl at the Holy Grounds archives, who can use it to help her build a barrier of soul resonances that will protect her from the threat of soul control. Second, she tells Renee about the Nuo masks carried by all Ode members, explaining that it complements Renee's gift by helping her maintain her essence in the stream. Following this exchange, Renee approaches Samsair and asks for her aid in finding her lost memory shards, which, being aware of everything in reach of the streams, the Goliath certainly has the power to do. But, true to form, she instead responds with the cryptic promise that she will guide Renee once she has taken an oath. I'll go over the details of this oath in just a bit, so for now let's skip ahead. Renee agrees to the terms, and Samsair restores some of her mask's power, enabling it to protect her from the direct impact of the stream. Bidding farewell to the Goliath, Renee and Ifri prepare to leave, and despite their pleading with Eros to return with them, she declines, explaining that her soul needs time to recover from the injuries inflicted by her forbidden spell. Instead, she gives Renee the key to her teardrop base, suggesting that she and Ifri travel there and take a look at her research, which may be of some use to them. They depart the Field of Hydro, sailing back through the mists, and stop by this remote island as they make their way back to Holy Grounds. They find Eros' notes concerning her research into the raising and the Ode, and after descending into the basement are attacked by the Eye, who appears to have escaped his confinement. Fortunately, he is little threat to them, and after killing the puppet, Renee keeps his broken mask. They subsequently depart the island and a short time later arrive at Holy Grounds, where they begin to search for Master Mage Owl, and in the process are surprised to find a camp of Geo-Scion refugees in a cave beneath the Gilded City. The SAD group is led by the Elder, a large and older Scion whom Ifri knows and simply calls Big Cat. The Elder explains to Ifri that he and the others are still searching for their princess, the Goliath of Geo, who went missing after the raising but had last been known to be at Holy Grounds. If she had been killed, then a new Geo-Goliath would have been rebuilt from the Molten Sanctum, but this never occurred, which meant she must still be alive. While the fate of the princess is ultimately never revealed and remains a mystery, there are a few clues that might indicate what happened to her. First, we know that the Molten Sanctum can malfunction if a Goliath's soul is transformed or damaged, as was the case with Ignis. Second, we know that memories can be taken by force, as is the case with 42 when she devours a soul. Third, we know that the Geo-Goliath was uncooperative with Eseus and refused to give her the secret of the wells, which led to Eseus taking a harsher approach. Fourth, we know that Eseus and the other mages learned powerful soul spells from the tablet. Taking all of this into account, it seems very likely that Eseus would have used this branch of magic to rip the memories she wanted out of the Geo-Goliath's soul, in the process causing irreparable damage. She was then held captive throughout the war, and when the raising eventually struck, perhaps her weakened soul was unable to resist its incredible soul-crushing power and was, to some degree, destroyed. Alternatively, and this is totally just speculation, Eseus may have used her soul as part of the ritual to open the well and cause the raising in the first place. Either way, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Geo Gate, which probably leads to the Well of Geo, closed only a short time later. Whatever happened to the princess, it somehow managed to damage the well itself, causing its waters to be contaminated and evaporate into a dark mist. Years later, when Captain Hill forced open the gate, this mist was released and instantly corrupted the souls of all it touched. Interestingly, this effect appears to be nearly identical to the one we see affecting the white feather birds of the Albedo Tower, which originated from the dark, turbid waters surrounding the Well of Anemo. As far as we know, this small group of Geo-Scions at Holy Grounds, along with Roku of course, could be the last of their kind, and if the Well of Geo truly was contaminated, then their prospects for the future may be quite grim indeed. Following this exchange, Renee and Ifri make their way to the top of the Grand Archives and find Owl in his study. Renee gives him a letter from Eros explaining the circumstances, and he agrees to perform the soul resonance ritual, though he strongly advises Renee to find more shards so that the protective barrier will be as strong as possible. And so they set out to find these long-lost shards, deciding to first visit the Albedo Tower to the north. They ascend its gravity-defying passageways, and approximately halfway up the Great Tower, stumble into a dark room containing a non-functional portal, the gateway to Nigredo Tower, along with the guider who had been watching them for some time. She commends Renee, assuring her that God is very satisfied with your growth, and mentions that the other essential is acting according to the plan as well, before quickly disappearing. Unsettled, Renee continues her climb and before long encounters one of the corrupted Darkfeather birds. She defeats the poor creature and finds Whitefeather, who explains that he had been subdued and held captive by these former companions following their sudden madness. He suspects they may have been infected from inside the Nigredo Tower, which he refers to as the Forbidden Grounds, but when Renee asks about the portal, he tells them the key has long been lost to time. Renee retrieves one of the bird's golden feathers to help him regain his strength, after which she and Ifri ascend to the very top of the tower and find a memory shard lying at the bottom of a clear pool. They next confront and defeat Alves, the pale guardian of the Field of Animo, and gain entrance to the massive sky palace above. Despite its beauty, however, both Renee and Ifri can tell that something is wrong with the place. Most notably, the Scions appear mindless and attack them on sight. It is only when they reach the highest spire in search of Atomos that they begin to understand the problem, finding the Goliath of Animo trapped in a nightmare with Ifri unable to touch her thoughts. With no way to help her, they reluctantly drop from the spire and head to the eastern edge of the Hollow City, where they ride the airy stream currents of the Heart of Veins high above the rest of the land. They find hundreds of petrified humans there, the victims of loss, and once again drive off the Gale Feather before falling back down to the Emerald Falls. Still searching for memory shards, they decide to journey back west through the Field of Geo and eventually arrive at the Goliath Fall Pass, the final battleground where thousands of beings had met their end. Despite the war ending years before, the land is still active, with the bodies and souls of humans who had fought there still wandering among the giant prism bones of the Pyro-Goliath's corpse. But they don't linger here for long and soon cross through the pass into the trees beyond, an ancient forest whose air is tainted by the all-too-familiar smell of smoke. Home of the northern village. Renee and Ifri head in its direction, but don't make it far before they are met by the hostile Pyro Scion Brander, who thinks Renee had somehow escaped the village's destruction and intends to finish his bloody work. But this time he is outmatched. Renee sends Brander back to the well with her now quite formidable combat skill, and in his last moments he explains that this is the new way set forth by the new Goliaths. Now realizing that the Rubywood attack was no mere accident and that his own generals are out slaughtering defenseless villages, Ifri is furious, and Renee takes notice. Seeing an opening, she finally asks Ifri what she had been wondering for some time, namely, how he knows so much about the affairs of Engarden. Anxious to keep moving, however, he sidesteps the question and promises to tell her everything later. They forge on to the village and find it in just as bad of a state as they had imagined. The entire place is ablaze with flame, teeming with mutated Pyro Scions and dark crimson shadows, and only a few memory fragments remain of the people who had once called it home. With no one to save and little to salvage, they continue on up the mountainside to the volcano fortress above and confront the Pyro-Goliath Aegis in his own hall. Though he recognizes and is shocked by Ifri's aura, he refuses to speak until Renee is killed, so she is forced to defeat and subdue him. Ifri tries reasoning with the Goliath, but the effort is futile. Aegis justifies his actions with the same argument as Brander, insisting that only when all humans are gone will peace return to Engarden. Just before his death, he refers to the other Pyro-Goliath, Akil, which worries Ifri greatly since he knows that there should only ever be one Goliath at a time. Pondering the implications of this, he tells Renee that they must find this other Goliath, and soon. But first they return to Holy Grounds, passing through the frozen veins on the way and finding another memory shard that had been washed into a crevice. Owl is confident that 3 shards will be enough to make a strong barrier, and so they begin the ritual. Instead of trying to forcibly merge Renee with the shards, this approach seeks to tune each soul to resonate in harmony with the others. But no sooner has this process begun than the guider suddenly appears from a portal and strikes out at Renee, causing the ritual to backfire and allowing her to sneak into Renee's soul field, where she attempts to snare the girl with the marionette curse. Fortunately, Owl is able to follow in close behind and lift the curse before it can take hold, and the guider does not challenge him, choosing to make her escape as quickly as she had appeared. It takes some time for Renee to awake after experiencing such soul trauma, and when she does, Owl explains that the cradle they had been using for the ritual had cracked. In order to complete it, Renee would need to travel deep below the earth to the first cradle in God's Hall, and Owl teaches Ifri how to host the ritual in his stead since he is bound to the archives, though not for much longer. Before attempting the ritual again, Renee agrees to help Owl in devising a unique spell to get him out of his predicament, and so he explains what had happened. He had been in the archives when the raising occurred and drew upon the power of the 3 Hallows kept within to resist the first impact. He then chained his soul to each of the Hallows' soul fields, which secured it against the second impact. Though successful, the trade-off was that he lost the ability to access the soul realm of his own volition, meaning he was permanently bound to the Hallows and unable to leave the archives. In the years following, Owl had waited for the right individual who could help him out of this situation, and believed that Renee was the perfect choice due to her unique talents, specifically citing her soul link with Ifri and strong aura of the Sea of Souls. He even remarks that, if it weren't for Eros, he would have taken on Renee as his own apprentice. This is high praise, and finally gives us a chance to discuss a big mystery that has been building this whole time. Who is Renee, really, and why is she so gifted? Well, we already know she was a member of the Ode to Luca, but this is just scratching the surface. She wasn't just a member, she was one of its best members. The sword she carries at the beginning of the game is said to have been awarded to outstanding members of the Ode by the Archpriest. Eros states that Renee was the first member to be given a Nuo mask. Her title was the Heart, and 42 refers to her as the one Easius valued most. She was an exceptional swordsman, as Avicia and Red Renee both inherited this skill. She had an aptitude for magic and was able to use the power of the Afterimage. Later in the story, she is able to hear the tablet, an ability that Ifri says is very rare, and one we learn that even Eros does not possess. And we can't forget that she survived the first impact of the raising, albeit severely injured, with no external help. But most significant of all is her gift. The name Renee literally means born again in its root French, and she was uniquely blessed with the capacity to rebuild herself directly from the stream without her soul ever needing to return to the Sea of Souls. The energy required to perform this feat must be immense considering the cost of rebuilding from artifacts and wells, and this latent energy may be the reason Renee is so receptive to the Afterimage. Though it is simple enough to understand how this gift of rebirth works, it is less clear why Renee has it in the first place or where she got it from. Eros calls it a gift from God, but considering Luca's long absence, it is doubtful the gift came directly from her, and this phrasing is more likely how special talents are referred to in general. More reliable information can be found in the description for Renee's primeval glyph, Rebirth, the Spiral Return, which reads, "Though being faded of her memory, the girl dimly remembered that this glyph was indeed what had accompanied her since childhood. She had no idea of its power until she met her careless companion." It would appear that Renee had the glyph for as long as she had the gift, and while you could perhaps interpret this as meaning Renee simply drew upon its regenerative power, I think it's actually the opposite. The glyph manifested out of Renee's power. If the gift could be taken from her simply by stealing the glyph, then surely Easius would have done that long ago. To really get to the bottom of this mystery, we must return to the oath discussed at the Field of Hydro. When Renee petitioned Samsair for aid, the Goliath agreed to guide her if she were to take an oath. The cost of this oath, as explained by Samsair, is that the flow of your soul will be engraved on the tablet. Also, fixing the world shall put you in great peril. This is very interesting as it directly contradicts something she had said earlier. When 42 asked Samsair why she refused to help with her curse, the Goliath responded, "That was not my obligation. Besides, the flows of all souls are already engraved on the tablet. It is the will of Luca." Based on this information, it would appear that Renee's soul is not yet engraved on the tablet, a discrepancy that may very well mean she isn't native to Engarden at all. We learn of many travelers who crossed into Engarden from other worlds, and it makes sense that these travelers would not be bound to the realm in the same way as those who were conceived there originally. After all, Renee's gift of rebirth essentially allows her to bypass the cycle of life and death established by Luca and Samsair. This explanation starts to make even more sense when we consider what taking the oath actually entails. Samsair tells Renee to complete the trial at each confluence, or in other words, obtain a stream crystal from each of Engarden's 4 veins using the primeval glyph of Covenant. As I explained earlier in context of the creation, these channels are quite literally the lifeblood of the world and make it possible for life to flourish within the realm. By taking a piece from each of these streams, Renee is making a covenant to become one with the greater body of Engarden. She even says, "It's my wish to live peacefully in this world with Madame and Ifri." Assuming all this to be true, we must now address the question, why? Why is this even necessary? Why can't Renee save the world as an outsider? This is perhaps explained by the glyph of Covenant itself, the epitaph of which is the trimming of strings. In programming terms, to trim a string means to remove leading or trailing whitespace from a selected string in order to consolidate and clean up a section of code. In a similar way, Renee can be seen as whitespace in the code of Engarden, an anomaly who does not belong and does not yet add measurable value. For her to truly engage with Engarden's systems, she needs to be integrated with its code. Curiously, Renee never speaks of this oath to Samsair again, and the stream crystal's only practical function is to allow Renee to challenge and wield the Sword of the Lake. As such, it is difficult to say whether we see Renee's oath completed or not, or what the consequence of her soul finally being engraved on the tablet might be. It stands to reason that, at the very least, she would forfeit her gift of rebirth and eventually return to the Sea of Souls with the rest of humanity. This explanation of Renee's significance makes the most sense to me, but to be perfectly clear, it is simply one possible interpretation, and there is other information about Renee that might yield different conclusions. For example, at the very bottom of the Sanctum Labs, we find a golden echo from Isius with the following memory. "What is this strange feeling when I look at the white-haired girl in the eye? Why do I feel the urge to call her my child when she turns to face me?" As far as we know, these two don't have any connection to each other beyond their affiliation with the Ode and the Essential Project, so what is meant by this is a mystery. Additionally, we must consider the mysterious doll found in the Rubywood ruins, which perfectly captures Renee's likeness. Based on its location, a chest in the deepest part of the ancient ruins, it seems extremely unlikely that the doll was made by anyone in the village, and instead must be ancient itself. Which leaves us with two possible explanations. Either Renee has been using her gift for centuries and is much older than she looks, or this past civilization saw into the future and crafted the doll knowing of Renee's essential role in the fate of the world, and there's actually pretty good evidence to back this one up. The doll is clearly wearing the uniform of the Ode to Luca, which wasn't around hundreds of years ago, and some strange root-like structures nearby are shaped to resemble giant bones like those at Goliathfall, as if the war itself had been foreseen. Oh wait, it totally was. It is referred to in the game's opening as the war that was promised. Interestingly, however, clairvoyance is never talked about as a form of magic in Engarden, so it's unclear what deeper meaning this connection might have. But I think it's about time we get back to the archives. After helping Owl craft a special artifact of pure soul energy, Renee learns how to perform the soul invasion spell and uses it to enter the soul fields of all 3 Hallows and destroy the chains binding Owl's soul to them. Freed at last, the Master Mage thanks Renee and tells her to keep the artifact so she can use the soul spell at her own discretion. Now equipped with this powerful ability, Renee and Ifri make their way back to Pat's campsite at the Columns, where only a dark aura remained after they met him there previously. They invade the dark presence there and find themselves in a truly strange soul field with blood-red skies and a dark castle in the distance. A trap. Pat reveals himself, and the man's soul is completely unrecognizable, deformed into a monster. He reveals that Renee's use of the rod had fed him many souls, and now he wants to claim hers, to become one, just as the heavenly voices had wanted. But Renee was not the easy target he expected, and even with his increased power, Pat is soundly defeated. Having now used the soul invasion spell on a human, and wondering if they could do the same for a Goliath, Renee and Ifri decide to return to the Sky Palace and see if they can make contact with Atomos. Upon entering her soul field, they are surprised to see how much it resembles the physical realm, and Ifri suggests that perhaps she has fallen too deeply into her own dreams, substituting them for reality. Only moments later, Renee finds herself surrounded by Animo Scions who promptly attack, but like their physical counterparts, they have no minds and are easily destroyed. Ifri then realizes that Atomos must be cut off from the Sea of Souls and is unwittingly consuming her own soul to form these guards, a destructive process that must be stopped. Using the primeval glyphs of rebirth and Animo, they are able to end her nightmare and regenerate the part of her soul that had been consumed. This brings great relief to the Animo Goliath, and she is finally able to sense their presence, but is still unable to fully awake since she remains untethered from the sea. We now return to 42, who had traveled to Holy Grounds after rebuilding Eros and eventually made her way to the lowest floor of the Institute labs where she found the chamber of her creation. Many research notes had been left behind after the raising, including Karin's calculations on how to theoretically extract the Cloudworm from its host soul, but before 42 can read this critical information, the Guider appears and slices it to pieces, telling 42, "This is not the end of your journey." They fight, and 42 manages to trap the Guider in one of her crystal cages, but to her surprise, she is able to easily slip out using her portals. She tells 42 that the Transcendent One awaits her elsewhere before vanishing just as quickly as she had appeared, leaving a strange key behind. Upon closer inspection, 42 realizes it is a key of Animo bearing the mark of Atomos, the very same key that Whitefeather had told Renee was long lost, and so she decides to head to the Sky Palace and find the sleeping Goliath to ask what it could mean. At this point in the story, we start getting into the game's many endings, but before that, I want to back up a bit and discuss some important side characters that I've mostly skipped over until now. I figured it would be easier to cover their stories all at once instead of spreading them throughout the video. First up is Nicole, the young girl who trained under Karin prior to the raising but was killed in an accident before the catastrophe occurred. As such, her soul survived and was able to be rebuilt in the aftermath, at which point she set out to find her master once more. Renee first meets Nicole in Resting Town and later crosses paths with her in the Emerald Falls, Whispering Forest, and finally the Goliath Fall Pass. Nicole had approached the occult prime of Animo and Geo there thinking it was Karin, only to be attacked and critically injured by the corrupted Master Mage. Ifri and Renee arrive just in time to save her life, treating the injury with first aid and probably a dose of regenerative magic, and the girl eventually makes her way back to Resting Town. But this is not quite the end of Nicole's story. She tells Renee and Ifri that she must continue searching for her master, and despite their warning and her compromised physical condition, she later disappears from the town. And deep in the Whispering Forest, near the base of the Albedo Tower, a blood-stained spellbook can be found with the following message written on the cover. "I am now giving my all for her coming, Nicole, yet you're still too weak to serve her. I shall leave this book for you to study. When you can decipher these words, return to me and become my assistant once more at Nigredo Tower. I think she shall appreciate you as well." It would appear that Nicole had finally deciphered the message and tried to return to her master at the tower, but was tragically killed and devoured by monsters before she could make it. Of course, it's worth pointing out that this book doesn't match the one Nicole had been carrying earlier, but it was specifically left for her, so things still don't look good. It's a pretty dark ending for her story, but the good news is, her chances of being rebuilt again aren't half bad considering her young age and the fact that the resting well is still intact. Next up, we have Karsa and Brenda. Renee first meets the strange duo on the resting path, where Karsa asks if she is familiar with the story of the Hermit, a talentless man who became a great adventurer and traveled the world. By following a trail of clues presumably left by the Hermit himself, Karsa hopes to find the Hermit's relic to prove that this legendary figure was not merely myth, but a real being. And Brenda just seems to be along for the ride. Throughout the game, their journey intersects with Renee's and Ifri's at many points, including at the Town of the Exiled, Ashen Canyon, Holy Grounds, the Albedo Tower, the Heart of Veins, and finally at the Emerald Falls in a lush, hidden grove, where Karsa finds the relic at last, a magical greatsword which he gives to Renee as a token of their short friendship. Its description contains some pretty interesting information. According to legend, the Hermit once had a good talk with a child of alien race. The silver-haired child took out this sword from his vast collection and gifted it to the Hermit as a mark of their friendship. This mysterious child is mentioned in several other places as well, namely the descriptions of the weapons Animogrim and Bloody Nobility, which indicate that this being from another realm decided to dwell in Engarden himself, and may have been Karsa's ancestor. After all, Karsa is the only character we meet with decidedly silver hair, and the way he freely gives the Hermit's sword to Renee perfectly mirrors the way the sword had been gifted by the silver-haired child so long ago. Another important character is Stanley, who runs the antique shop in the Town of the Exiled. As an old friend of Owl's, he previously sold Renee the materials needed to forge the Soul Spell artifact and free the Master Mage, and later meets up with him at Holy Grounds. Stanley plans to travel throughout Engarden in search of new wares to sell in his shop, and while Owl still needs time to recover and thus cannot leave the archives quite yet, he creates a clone of himself to accompany Stanley on this journey. Renee later runs into the pair at Goliathfall and at the Solar Birthplace, after which Owl's clone dissipates and Stanley alone is found at the Emerald Falls and the Forest Foregone. He muses over the great destruction to have befallen this once beautiful land and wonders whether those responsible would feel any remorse if they were to see it now. And that about wraps it up for this section. These are not the only side characters, of course, but most of the others have very little impact on the story, like the Traveling Conjurers. They can be found in various regions of Engarden, but are mostly just interested in cooking slugs and stuff. On that note, let's get to the endings. Afterimage has 10 endings, which can be neatly divided into 3 sets of 3. The Renee endings, the Ifri endings, and the Isius endings, with the 10th being the singular and separate Shenlong ending. The true ending of the game is not any one of these on their own, but rather a combination of the third ending from each set, which occur in chronological sequence and provide closure for each character involved. The remaining 7 endings can be thought of as possible outcomes that could have happened but ultimately don't. That said, some aspects of these endings play a role in the corresponding true ending of their set, so they do carry significance despite not technically being canon, and for that reason I will cover them all in this section. If that all sounds pretty convoluted, it is, but hopefully things will start to make more sense as we go, starting with the Shenlong ending, the Wall, since it's the wild card of the bunch. The path leading to this ending starts early on in Renee's journey when she and Ifri first meet C in her Cave of Lure. Upon awakening, the sleepy fairy realizes that the adventurers are in possession of the books she had written and hidden away so long ago, the Words of Shenlong, which they purchased from Stanley, and decides to give them a grand quest. She tells them to find a number of mysterious Shenlong glyphs hidden throughout Engarden and bring them back to her when they have them all, but does not bother to explain why. These glyphs are found in every corner of the world, from the top of the Solar Birthplace to the bottom of the Misty Waters, but invariably, each is found at the base of a pure white tree. Once all 8 of them are found, Renee and Ifri return them to C as instructed, who gives them a golden key in return and simply says to carry it with them around Engarden because it might be of assistance. Its purpose only becomes clear when they inexplicably decide to sail out into the Misty Waters with a dark lantern and then attempt to sail back to the Silent Coast. Instead of getting lost in the mist, they end up reaching the very edge of the realm itself, an empty cosmic plain filled with only the quiet lapping of the sea against its shore. Eons before, Luca herself had stood in this very spot, and so strong was her memory that it left an echo, the only one of hers we ever find. It reads, "The field is not my creation. It belongs not to this world, and closer visits reveal stronger peculiarity. Beyond the gate there is unknown, without guarantee of safety. I shall veil it with mist and seal to prevent visitors astray." Thus were the mists of the Misty Waters born, a nebulous lock over the edge of the world, and Luca personally entrusted C with its key. Knowing this, it should come as no surprise that Renee finds the Grand Fairy herself abiding there, waiting for them. She asks if they are willing to cross the threshold and enter a mysterious land where not even God has roamed, and Ifri is unsurprisingly delighted by such a prospect. He and Renee continue on, traversing the great expanse until they reach a red phone booth. Renee dials a number on the rotary phone, and the world dissolves into code as the two are transported to another world. And where exactly might that be? Though never stated outright, it is at least implied that they traveled to the realm of Shenlong, our own reality. The glyphs necessary to obtain this ending are not fictional, but are actually the Bagua, 8 interrelated concepts associated with Taoist cosmology. I won't be covering them in depth here for time's sake, and also because I've already written about them at length in my breakdown of the game Signalis. If you're interested in learning more about the topic, I would encourage you to check out that video when you have the time. However, there is one connection I'd like to briefly draw attention to here. In test record 58-2, we learned that human researchers were tracing the process of creation backwards in order to better understand the nature of test subject Gongor and his petrification ability. In Taoist cosmology, such an endeavor was supposed to yield the ultimate state of oneness embodied by the Tao itself, and that is precisely what Isius is trying to achieve by fusing all human souls into one true being. Really interesting stuff, but let's keep moving and discuss the first set of endings, the Renee endings. These occur after Renee fights and defeats Valo the first night, and descends into the sunken sanctum where she and Ifri prepare to complete the soul resonance barrier ritual at the first cradle in God's Hall. They find an ancient device set before the cradle that appears to function as its control panel, and the number of memory shards put into it determines which ending will play out. First is the homecoming, which occurs when no shards are put in and Renee simply investigates the device instead. Without warning, the guider appears, telling Renee, "You have turned away from your fate. I will guide you back onto your true track." They fight and the guider wins. In the following cutscene, we see Renee, looking confused, with 4 other members of the Ode, her soul now held captive by the marionette curse and her mind no longer fully her own. She prays at the shimmering cradle while the guider appears to give the group instruction, and Ifri watches helplessly from behind one of the lunar statues. Essentially, Renee has now come home to the Ode, where the guider will keep her until Red Renee finishes gathering all her memory shards and returns to absorb her at last. And this is precisely what happens in the second ending, the Cradle, which occurs when Renee places either 1 or 2 memory shards into the ancient device. The guider had been waiting for this, preparing a ritual of her own, and suddenly appears to tell Renee that she will guide her onto the true path. Once again they fight, but this time Renee wins. The guider casts the marionette curse, which is blocked by the almost complete resonance barrier, but this is no more than a distraction. In a quick flash, Red Renee leaps from the shadows and strikes Renee down with her sword. We next see Red Renee absorbing both her and Ifri's souls in the guider's ritual. The day she long dreamed of had finally come to pass, when she could finally become complete at the cradle of all life. The third and canonical ending is called the Essential and occurs when Renee places all 3 memory shards into the ancient device. As in the cradle ending, the guider appears, is defeated by Renee, and attempts to distract her, but this time Renee is able to block Red Renee's sudden strike. The guider tells Red Renee to prove that she is the superior resonant, and so she attacks Renee and, after a furious fight, defeats her. Red Renee destroys the incomplete resonance barrier and pulls Renee's soul and all 3 memory shards into her own soul field so she can absorb them. But she makes the mistake of starting with the shards, which gives Avicia an opening to burst out. Although the blue resonant had been absorbed previously at Goliath Fall, Red Renee had rushed the process, and 1 tiny shard of Avicia's soul managed to retain its independence. She now challenges Red Renee, demanding to know why things had to be like this, why they could not face the world together as equals, to which Red Renee responds that no one had been there for her in her time of need. She calls Avicia and Renee imposters, an accusation that Avicia promptly throws back in her face. Livid, Red Renee strikes Avicia, knocking her back towards Renee, exactly where she wanted to be. Avicia quietly tells Ifri to resonate her soul with Renee's in order to construct a new barrier, explaining that her soul is essentially a memory shard. Ifri does so, and the spell works almost instantly, probably because, unlike a regular shard, Avicia was fully cognizant and trying to resonate too. She stands up to Red Renee one final time, saying, "I wish to help us all. I wish to help you as well. Renee, please share with me all the power you possess. I will leave with you, and now leave all your fear and pain behind. At least I had the choice to keep the Renee whom I wished to become." And with that, she dashes into Red Renee, their souls colliding with a brilliant flash of light. Because she and Renee were harmonized, the combined strength of their souls overpowered that of Red Renee, causing her attempted absorption to backfire. She and Avicia are both absorbed by White Renee, who is now finally complete just as she was before the raising. Except now, she possesses all of her resonance memories as well. In the final scene, we witness Renee stripping the guider of her power by taking her lunar crest, and a mysterious symbol appears behind her. Judging by the achievement description for this ending, this is the moment that Renee's oath is finally completed and her soul is engraved on the tablet, seared there by fate. And based on the symbol's design, which matches that of the World Tree, I think what we are seeing is the purest manifestation of the Afterimage, a sign that Renee has been accepted by the world of Engarden. But this isn't actually the first time we've seen it. The symbol also appears on every mural of Isius, trailing behind her, perhaps showing that she too has tapped into the full potential of Luca's primeval aura, though it is notable that the symbol is green and purple here rather than pure white as it appears behind Renee. While this outcome takes the guider by surprise, her work is nonetheless finished. Renee has become the essential, which was basically the plan all along. It didn't matter to Eseus which Renee became whole again, so long as a suitable vessel was prepared for her eventual escape. Following these events in God's Hall, Renee and Ifri journey back to the Field of Hydro, where the Glyph of Sorrow they had obtained from the Sanctum enables them to pass through the underwater gate and discover the lunar graveyard beyond. Using the Eye of Gongor, which Renee had previously taken from the test subject after killing him at the Whispering Forest, she crumbles a still warm moon to reveal the Golden Crow beneath, who explains that he has taken his last flight and will soon perish. His only wish is that he could have returned to the solar birthplace to meet his end, and Ifri decides to break natural law and make it happen. He rejuvenates the crow's ball with pyro energy, and in his gratitude, the crow carries them back with him so that they may witness the grand volcanic peak for themselves. From this vantage point at the top of the world, Renee and Ifri travel south through Scorchware down to the Field of Pyro, where Ifri hopes to find the second Goliath of Pyro and stop his assault on humanity. But first, they must get past the Colossus Ignis had made to protect the land during the war. The heat passively radiating from it alone is more than any human could bear, but by harnessing the power of the burning plume obtained from Eldred the Phoenix, who Renee had defeated earlier at the Rainbow Plains, Renee is shielded from the heat and able to bring the behemoth crashing down. Passing beyond into the field itself, Renee fights her way through legions of twisted pyro scions to get to the well at its center, where she finds Akil. He attacks immediately, seeking revenge for Renee's slaying of his brother Aegis, but is no match against she who had bested even the Guider. Ifri reprimands the young Goliath, asking how he and Aegis can claim to be better than humans when they sink into the same depravity, but Akil is incapable of understanding. He believes only the complete eradication of humanity can atone for the meaningless losses they suffered from the war. And Ifri's response to this is profound, perhaps my favorite line in the game. "We all err. If you believe massacre is the answer to all problems, eventually every potential cause of trouble will be destroyed, and Engarden will become a land of desolation." Following Akil's death, Ifri decides it is finally time to tell Renee the truth, and so he explains everything. How his true identity is that of the Pyro Goliath Ignis, how he was defeated and captured by humans, and how he bonded to Renee with the Soul Link spell during the Raising. He explains that in his new form he can only cast spells with the aid of primeval glyphs, and the reason he has been collecting these glyphs along their travels is that he hoped to eventually undo the Soul Link and restore his power and position as the Goliath of Pyro. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when a powerful quake rumbles through the caverns, and Ifri realizes that it originated from the Molten Sanctum. Rushing down to the superheated chamber, the two find a single giant egg containing the merged souls of Aegis and Akil, and Ifri, quite worried about the prospect of an even stronger Goliath bent on genocide, tells Renee that they must undo the link now and restore his power so he can keep them in line once they hatch. And it is here the Ifri endings officially begin. The first is called The Withering and is the simplest of the set. Renee agrees to go through with Ifri's plan, the Soul Link is broken, and Ifri takes his place as the Goliath of Pyro once more. But this choice has an unintended consequence. In the final scene, the egg falls to the ground, its inner light extinguished. The soul inside has withered away, for reasons which will become clear in a minute. The second ending is called The Hope, and is instigated by Renee. Instead of listening to Ifri, she takes matters into her own hands and invades the unborn Goliath's soul field, determined to kill it before it has the chance to hatch. This is pretty impulsive and dark for Renee, but also kind of understandable. She had heard Aegis and Akil's unwavering resolve to kill her and everyone she loved, and the destruction of Rubywood Village was surely still fresh in her mind. Additionally, we must remember that Renee's soul is now fused with Red Renee's and quite likely influenced by her trauma and darker nature. Ifri desperately tries to talk her down, promising to convince the Goliath that not all humans are evil, but Renee is doubtful this will work and responds, "I can trust you, but I can't trust them. I can't bear the price of making the wrong choice. Madam, and everyone in the town, I must protect them all this time." Seeing she will not back down, Ifri attempts to restrain Renee by force, but is unsuccessful. We next see the egg with its shell destroyed and its essence draining into the lava below, while Ifri lies motionless next to Renee's purple headband and broken sword. The implications are not entirely clear. Did Ifri and Renee both die? Or did Renee leave these items behind as a means of rejecting the life she once had? Either way, Renee believed that she had restored hope to humanity and given them a brighter future by her sacrifice. But in truth, she had only bought them more time. As Ifri tried warning her earlier, the Sanctum would still eventually create a new Goliath, one who could be just as bad or even worse than Aegis and Akil. This brings us to the third and canonical ending, the Journey. It starts much the same as the Hope, with Renee choosing to invade the egg's soul field with the intent of destroying it, but this time she listens to Ifri and decides not to go through with it. Her impulsive decision was quite important, however, because upon their return to the physical realm, Ifri has a realization. As he explains to Renee, Aegis and Akil were born because the Soul Ink spell had transformed our souls into a novel form. This prevented the Molten Sanctum from sensing my unique soul as the Goliath of Pyro. It must have believed my soul had completely vanished. Because there was only ever intended to be one Goliath at a time, if Ifri were to restore his position, the Sanctum would sense his soul again and the egg would no longer be needed. It would wither and die, Aegis and Akil vanishing once and for all, and this is precisely what we saw happen earlier in The Withering. But there was another option. Since the issue with Aegis and Akil had been their lack of a Goliath heart and its guiding restraint, Ifri could try using the power of the primeval glyphs to isolate his own heart and transfer it into the egg, causing the two young Goliaths to be reborn as a singular and complete Goliath of Pyro. Renee is justifiably concerned how this will affect Ifri, and though he quickly assures her that he'll be fine, after completing the spell and successfully transferring the heart, he falls to the ground. Thinking Ifri had just died right in front of her, Renee freaks out, and Ifri really milks the moment before surprising her with his usual perky self. She is not amused. In the final shots of the ending, we see Renee and Ifri in the Molten Sanctum shortly after this exchange, and then, sometime later, at the base of the Albedo Tower, looking up at the grand structure where their next journey awaits. This is a pretty important detail since it provides a clear transition to the Easius endings, and shows that the Ifri endings definitely occur after the Renee endings. Taken together, the Easius endings constitute the final capstone on the story of Afterimage, and they all start with 42. Following her prior investigation of God's Hall and confrontation with the Guider, 42 traveled to the Albedo Tower intending to make her way up to the Sky Palace and find Atomos. But not long after beginning her ascent, she discovers the sealed gate that Renee and Ifri had stumbled upon earlier, and uses the now resonating Animo key to activate the device and enter the Forbidden Grounds. She is still in the tower, but it appears quite different now. The stone is dark, the air is heavy, and, most importantly, everything is flipped upside down. Or rather, right side up. You'll notice that the windows, paintings, and general design of the structure are finally oriented properly because 42 is now on the ceiling, the true floor of the Nigredo Tower. To understand the nature of this place, we must go back to the very beginning when Luca had begun the process of creation and decided to circulate energy throughout the world using a network of veins. To start the process, she needed a way to get stream high into the atmosphere where it could then be poured down upon the Emerald Falls. And so a great tower was devised, positioned between two opposing realities, one half to live in the light, the other to live in the shadows. The names themselves indicate this dual nature. Albedo refers to light, specifically light reflected from a planet or other celestial body, and Nigredo is an alchemical term referring to the darkness of despair and decomposition. So, that being established, where exactly is the Nigredo Tower? It's clearly not in the physical realm, and I don't think it's in the soul realm either, at least not completely, since physical bodies and objects are able to easily enter and reside in the structure. Rather, it appears to be a dark mirror dimension of the physical realm where certain laws, such as gravity, operate in reverse. And this last detail is essential since it saved Luca the effort of needing a complex siphoning mechanism to pull stream up into the sky. Instead, she built the central axis of the tower in Nigredo upside down so that the stream would simply fall to the top. This gravitational effect is also likely the reason why the tower is able to support the weight of the massive Sky Palace above, and why we can see a mirrored illusion of the Whispering Forest below. After breaking a mysterious magic seal in the floor, 42 makes her way to the bottom of the tower and finds the dark lake Easius had shown her at the Institute of Spirit, with the Well of Animo at its center, or at least half of it. Because everything is reversed, she is actually at the top of the albedo tower where the well resides in the physical realm. The ethereal blue-green haze seen at the base of the Sky Palace is the Nigredo Lake manifesting in the physical realm, which occurs because the waters lead directly into the Sea of Souls and are filled with immense energy. But 42 is not alone here. Karine has been waiting. She welcomes her former test subject to the Dark Lair and explains the circumstances behind her creation, calling her powers a gift, to which 42 responds that it is nothing but a terrible curse. She demands Karine tell her how to rid herself of the Cloud Worm, but the Master Mage says nothing, and 42 attacks her to wrest the answer by force. Karine is easily beaten, and after swearing she will never give up this information, retreats into her own soul field. 42 prepares to unleash the demon within and devour Karine's soul, which would give her access to all of her memories, but then hesitates. She can feel the strong aura of the Sea of Souls all around her emanating from the lake, and knows full well that Karine's soul is much more complicated and powerful than any she had consumed before. This is the point where the endings begin to branch off from each other. In the first, titled The Dream, 42 decides to look around before committing to any course of action and finds a large mirror tucked away at the far end of the room, the Mirror of Reality. No sooner has she done so than Atomos speaks to her through it, thanking 42 for breaking the magical seal blocking her connection to the Sea of Souls, and offering to help her accomplish her wish as a token of her gratitude. She had heard 42's conversation with Karine, and sensing the cloudworm within her soul, Atomos invites her to travel through the mirror and come to her soul field. The Goliath thanks her once more for waking her from the dream within a dream, and muses that perhaps their meeting is not chance, but destiny. She then explains to 42 that she cannot remove the cloudworm directly without knowing how it was fused in the first place, and instead gives her two options. First, 42 can unwrap her soul to devour Karine and give full soul power to the cloudworm in this state, at which point it might heed her command, or may very well devour her next. The second option is to let Atomos seal the cloudworm into a deep sleep, just as Karine had done to the Goliath, which would allow 42 to finally live a normal life, though a chance would always remain that the creature would someday wake up, and choosing this option meant she would no longer have access to its power. Nevertheless, after a few moments of thought, 42 chooses the second option as a way to buy herself more time while she continues her search for a way to rid herself of it completely. Atomos then explains that 42 must face and defeat the demon herself before the sealing can take place, and within a few moments, she guides the girl into her own soul field. 42 faces the cloudworm and, by using its own crystallization powers against it, beats the creature into submission. In the final scene, 42 is shown leaving the tower, her inner demon now sealed within the deepest of dreams. She is no longer obscured by her magical cloak, and is free to live out her life in any way she chooses. All in all, it's a pretty good ending, but Isius remains, and the day of her eventual return draws ever closer. The second ending is called The Waiting, and occurs when 42 decides to devour Karine's soul, but importantly, without giving the cloudworm full soul power as Atomos had suggested. She unwraps her soul and unleashes the demon, but as she attempts to pull Karine's soul out of her soul field, suddenly finds herself in a different place altogether. The Sea of Souls, where a strange magical imprint is placed upon her. And then she hears a voice. Isius tells 42 that her shared code and power to manipulate souls allow her to enter the sea awake, after which the mage reveals herself, further explaining that 42 is a part of her and that it was she who requested that Karine create her in the first place. 42 then realizes that the situation with Karine at the well had been a setup, and that the point all along had been to induce her into devouring the Master Mage's soul, and this is subsequently confirmed by Isius, who explains, "Only if you unwrap your soul at the entrance to the Sea of Souls will I be able to truly touch you." 42 demands to know why she was afflicted with such pain, subjected to the endless torment of devouring souls, and Isius simply tells her the truth. The reason for her creation was not merely to produce energy for the war. Rather, it was to advance the true purpose of the Ode to Luca, perfectly merging all souls to evolve humanity into what it truly should be, a greater being. And for this to happen, 42 would need to return to her creator. But these poetic words fall on deaf ears. 42 did not come all this way to give herself up, and so Isius attempts to subjugate her by force. They clash in a tremendous battle, their magic fueled by the near-infinite power of the sea itself, and Isius falls to the power of the cloudworm. only to be fully rebuilt moments later from her memory crystal. She tells the surprised 42 that she had created a sea of her own soul, the giant blue vortex behind them, and no matter how many times her body is destroyed, it will return in an endless loop. Eisius then renews her imprint on 42 and states the following: "I've left an imprint of the sea of my soul onto you. It built a bridge that connected to the new world as soon as you came in. The imprint is the key. I will give it to you, and when the time comes, I'll leave this place through the bridge as well." Essentially, 42 is now in checkmate. If she returns to the physical realm, Eisius will have a direct connection there through the sea of her soul and will finally be able to escape. But the Archpriest would rather not force her child to comply and continues trying to persuade her that this is their destiny. She promises that 42 will be able to keep her memories and live freely for the time being, but when the time comes, they must be united. Together they will slip free of their gilded cage and build their own paradise before Luca returns, with Eisius herself personally leading all the human race to happiness. 42 immediately rejects this idea, challenging her right to impose on anyone her idea of happiness. But eventually, and inexplicably, she gives in. The final scene shows 42 leaving the tower, still shrouded by her magical cloak and carrying the imprint within her. She retreats into the forest, resigned to her fate, and there she waits for Eisius's plan to come to fruition. This definitely feels a bit out of character for 42, and as such I would consider it one of the weaker endings, but fortunately this is not how her story actually ends. For this, we must move on to the third and canonical Eisius ending, the World Flower. It starts much the same as The Waiting, with 42 being pulled into the Sea of Souls and confronting Eisius, but this time Renee and Ifri get involved. Not long after the Nigredo portal had been reactivated by 42, the duo come upon it while passing through the Albedo Tower and decide to investigate. Now, it's not entirely clear how they knew to come here following the events at the Molten Sanctum. Perhaps, now that the Guider had been defeated, Renee wanted to figure out what she had been doing earlier by the entrance to the Forbidden Grounds. They pass through the portal into the Dark Tower and descend to the Well of Animo, where they find the bodies of Karine and 42. Ifri can tell that their souls are elsewhere, and based on the strong magical residue hanging around the chamber, he guesses that they are now fighting within a soul field. And despite having no knowledge of what had transpired between the two, Renee wants to repay 42 for saving Eros's life, and tries to invade her soul field on the chance that she could use their help. But surprisingly, the spell fails, as Renee is rebuffed by a strong magical barrier. She then tries the spell on Karine instead, and this time it works. The Master Mage is surprised to see Renee there, and realizes that the Guider must have failed in preparing Red Renee. Though, as she notes, a vessel was still finished regardless. Karine then tries to bind them with magic so as to hand them over to Eisius, but underestimates just how strong her opponent has become, and is killed within her own soul field. Renee processes her remains into a prism bone, after which she and Ifri decide to travel back to the Grand Archives and ask Al for advice on the situation with 42. Based on their description of the barrier, he correctly guesses that 42 is within the Sea of Souls, and tells Renee that the masks of the Ode, including the one she now carries, were originally crafted to allow passage into the sea. Since Renee's mask is still incomplete, however, they decide to once again visit Samsair at the Well of Hydro and see if she can restore its full power, just as she had repaired its stream resistance previously. The Goliath is willing, and by using the fragments of other masks that Renee had collected on her journey, she fully restores the artifact to its original form, a true Nuo mask. But Samsair is aware of their plan, and subsequently informs Renee that the mask alone is insufficient. She says that to enter and act within the Sea of Souls, they will need a sword to slice through the barrier and a light to guide their way, but declines to give any further details, explaining that she shouldn't involve herself in the happenings of the world for Luca's sake. And so Renee and Ifri set out to find these objects. The light they find by the giant tortoise, who refers to it as the halo of Genesis left over from Engarden's creation, and the sword they find at an ancient shrine in the Heart of Veins, Persecoral, the very sword that Luca had used to slice open the Sea of Souls a millennia ago. But it does not come easily. Sensing the concentrated power of the stream crystals Renee had obtained, it invades her soul field, and only after proving her strength to the sentient weapon does it submit to her hand. Now armed with mask, sword, and light, Renee and Ifri return to the Nigredo Tower and enter the Sea of Souls through 42, where they find her savagely attacking Eisius's memory crystal. Surprised at their sudden arrival, 42 quickly catches them up to speed, explaining how Eseus had caused the raising, was planning a second raising from the Well of Anemo, and continued to be rebuilt again and again no matter how many times 42 killed her. It is at this moment that Renee finally begins to realize where she fits into this plan, but her train of thought is interrupted by the appearance of Eseus, fully rebuilt once more. The Archpriest immediately places her imprint on Renee, causing memories to flood into her mind. It's hard to say exactly why this happens without knowing what the memories were, but it could be that linking Renee's soul to another sea jostled her memory shards and caused some of her resonance deeper memories to slip out. As she recovers from this unexpected assault on her senses, Ifri has an idea. If Eseus's body and soul really are intertwined, then they might be able to defeat her by killing her body and soul at the same time. 42 agrees to give it a try, and in an instant Renee strikes out and invades Eseus's soul field, which appears quite different than any she had seen before. But the Archpriest does not wish to fight. After telling Renee that she is an integral part of the new world, she tries to undermine the girl's convictions, talking candidly of Luca's absence. What did their god want from this world? Why did she create humans in her own image and grant them almost complete freedom only to bind them with limited life? The answer, she says, can be found in the Sea of Souls, and she challenges Renee to go and see what is hidden beneath its depths. Now, I want to acknowledge that Eseus is not being deceitful with this line of questioning. In fact, I think she is at her most sincere. These are her questions for God, and the pursuit of their answers is what put her on the path to godhood herself. To understand exactly what Eseus is getting at here, we must first go back and examine the town of the exiled through a new lens. Earlier when I discussed the haunted town, I explained how Aus was persuaded to go through with the ascendancy ritual primarily as a way for her and the rest of the townsfolk to escape the hardships of their impoverished existence. But there was more to it than that. The Master Mage was also greatly driven by fear. In one of the fragments of the Heavenly Voices, a manuscript which contains the doctrines of Eseus herself, we read the following: "Rebirth is never a gift. The foolhardy souls will eventually be trapped in the sea and fall into eternal sleep, awaiting the harvest day. Her return shall bring no renaissance but catastrophe. Only by following the guide of true God can we escape from this hopeless end." Keeping these words in mind, let's now talk about Ethan. Renee and Ifri first run into the old man near the teardrop shore and learn he had set out on a journey to investigate the cult-infested town at the bottom of the valley so as to exorcise the evils there with God's light. He is later found in one of the town's abandoned houses reading this very fragment, scoffing at the very thought that people would be foolish enough to believe such teachings. And yet, a part of him begins to doubt. He travels to the Silent Coast, and when Renee and Ifri find him there, he has been driven mad and lost his sight. Somehow, he had caught a glimpse of the Sea of Souls in the misty waters, and now in anguish cries, "The Sea of Souls, what had I seen in it? So many, the souls. They are shining, sleeping." Though the man is unresponsive to Renee and Ifri's questioning, and they have no choice but to leave him, he eventually makes his way back to the town and is haunted by the same voice that had corrupted Aus. His journey finally comes to an end at the Heart of Veins, where he can be found turning himself into stone with these last words: "Finally, I've found the ultimate answer. I'm not afraid anymore. I will not dissipate, nor die, nor be harvested by you. I will last forever. I will exist in my world forever." Along with Renee, we are led to ask, what terrified him so? What did he see at the bottom of the Sea of Souls that led him to such an extreme outcome? And the answer is simply souls. Countless souls, completed souls, as numerous as the flowers under the Rubywood ruins, complete because they are filled with memory. As Eseus muses in one of her Sanctum Echoes, the memory shard is our essence and our chains. Every human can only have so much memory. A full shard means the end of our lives. Those completed memory shards will sink into the deep bottom of the Sea of Souls and be lost forever. This is precisely the reason why not all souls can be rebuilt. The souls of those who had lived long and those who were full of experience and knowledge had already been filled with memory and sunk into the deep sea. But contrary to what Eseus says, these souls are not lost as they become the very stars in the sky. There's plenty of evidence for this. First, the description for the twin-born armor pieces states, "Long after they have sunk into the deep sea, the twin souls continue to breathe and shine one after another as if competing for the brighter star." Additionally, in the homecoming ending cutscene, we see what appears to be a starry sky behind the cradle. This should be impossible in a deep underground cave, unless of course we are gazing into the Sea of Souls itself. Finally, in the game's intro sequence, we are told that the stars have not yet returned to their proper paths, which could be a reference to the immense number of souls, stars in the making, who had been destroyed by the razing. Eisius believes that when Luca returns, she will harvest these souls for their memories and the world will go dark. No renaissance, but catastrophe. This is what she reveals to those who get too close to the sea, and what Ethan believed to the end. But Renee is having none of it. She doesn't care what Eisius has to say and remains determined to carry out her part of the plan even after the Archpriest reveals her soul's new and immensely powerful form. What follows is a truly epic battle, a clash between gods and monsters for the fate of this world, Eisius fighting both 42 in the sea and Renee in her soul. Perhaps unsurprisingly, 42 is the first to defeat the Transcendent One, and the destruction of Eisius's body causes the sea to bleed into her soul field. Seeing this, Renee redoubles her efforts, and Eisius summons the full power of the Afterimage to fuel her final stand. But Renee is backed by the Afterimage as well, having claimed its power by defeating the Guider, and strikes her down at last. Eisius ruefully acknowledges her failure, and as her soul field begins to collapse, Renee is forced back into the Sea of Souls. The memory crystal becomes unstable, shaking violently as it prepares to shatter. And 42 makes a decision. Instead of letting Eisius perish, she decides to use the imprint Eisius had given her to cross the bridge into her new world. Bidding farewell to her newfound friends, she pushes them out of the sea and begins to channel her crystallization power, creating a cage that envelops the breaking memory crystal. In the final scene of the ending, we see Renee and Ifri flee the Albedo Tower and make their way to Holy Grounds, where a massive crystal flower, the World Flower, can be seen bursting from the sunken capital. This ending is by far the most open-ended, and raises a host of questions. Why did 42 change her mind? What exactly is this flower? And why did it bloom at Holy Grounds and not at the Albedo Tower? There are no definitive answers to any of these, but we can make some reasonable speculations. For starters, 42 appears to have crystallized Eisius' soul to save it, just as she did for Eros at the very beginning of the story, and this act resulted in the creation of the crystal flower. Notably, however, Renee interpreted this quite differently, writing in her logbook that 42 had to sacrifice herself to put an eternal seal upon Eisius. It is worth pointing out, of course, that she had not heard their earlier conversation about the New World. It's not totally clear what Eisius meant by this term, but based on the events of this ending, it would appear that her plan to build a new paradise did not mean remaking the world of Engarden, but creating a brand new world altogether. And this makes sense considering her soul field is filled with building blocks as though she had already gotten started. Perhaps a new realm exists within the World Flower, a new dimension where 42 and Eisius had ultimately become one. Near the very end of the game, when all three traveling conjurers have returned to Resting Town, Renee has an interesting conversation with Alice. She tells Renee, Master once said that his greatest joy was to offer his customers all sorts of delicacies to try. How can giving away what you worked so hard to make bring such happiness? Humans are indeed quite interesting. Ifri complains that such philosophy is quite unlike her, and she responds by offering to make him a new dish, the taste of happiness. As always, he is thrilled, but after they try the special dish, Alice's philosophizing returns. She asks if the meal has brought them joy, and when they respond affirmatively, she simply says, "That's nice. Then I feel joy alongside you." She continues, "After the razing, people barely survived the harsh environment left them. Some chose to rob others. Some chose to only protect themselves. Others, like my brothers and sisters, they are still willing to share, happily doing whatever they desire. By my experience, people like my brothers and sisters have a better chance at surviving. It seems like the mortal meaning of life isn't merely surviving, but also requires a dash of happiness. Despite being quite difficult to quantify, the concept of happiness does serve a vital purpose." Ifri once again calls out her strange shift in tone, and after nonchalantly dismissing it as being immersed in her thoughts, Alice quietly says one more thing. "The data acquired this time is quite complex. Further calculations and analyses are required later on my return." The reason this conversation feels off and out of character is because Alice is actually Luca. The evidence is all there in her words. She worked so hard to make Engarden, then essentially gave it away. She refers to humans as though she isn't one, despite there being no indication of conjurers being anything but human. She makes reference to an eventual return. And finally, if that wasn't enough, we can look at her name. In its German roots, Alice means noble and exalted. This is no coincidence, just as Luca and Renee's names are no coincidence. Engarden had always been the residence of God, for the bringer of light never truly left, at least not completely. She stayed in a diminished form as a single golden branch on the world tree to live as a simple cook and watch and learn from her creations. Isius had postulated that the goddess wished to learn the meaning of her existence, that's why she created this paradise and made us in her image. I think she wanted to put us through the test of time so that she could see in us her own past and future. And honestly, I think Isius could be right. Ultimately, Luca wanted to understand the meaning of happiness, to taste it for herself. But this then begs the question, if Luca remained, why doesn't she intervene in the affairs of the world? Why does she allow her creations to suffer, for people like Isius to do as they please, when surely she has the power to put an end to such things? Does she actually care for her children? For their happiness? While this point is definitely debatable, I'm inclined to believe that she does. We must not forget that Luca made for them a paradise, a veritable Garden of Eden, with strong and noble Goliaths to nurture and protect. She provided them a well to rebuild their bodies and allow for second chances. And finally, she gave them the greatest gift of all, choice. As we learn from the Sword of the Hermit, never has God put so much expectation on anything but the beings. The only mission sent by God for them was to explore their own possibilities. Unlike the primeval beings and Goliaths who were born with certain obligations, humanity was given the power to choose for themselves and forge their own destinies, and for Luca or Samsair to intervene every time they chose poorly would defeat the purpose of her plan. But she had never truly abandoned them. Someday the goddess will return in divine glory, and the Afterimage will finally be eclipsed by the brilliant light of its origin. And now, this video finally comes to a close. When I first began working on it, like 7 months ago, I thought it would be pretty easy to cover everything in less than an hour. But as I delved ever deeper into the game's story and peeled back the many layers of its lore, I realized I would need to go much further to do justice to the world of Engarden and claim that this retelling was in any way complete. And even after all that, plenty of mysteries remain unsolved beyond the World Flower ending. What exactly does Luca plan to do when she makes her divine return? And when will that be? Will the Goliath of Geo ever be found? Where did the tablet come from in the first place? Why did the Raging Veins and Gate of Geo close on their own? And most important of all, who the heck is this bearded guy? Fortunately, the developers seem to hint that a sequel might come at some point down the line, and some of these questions might someday be answered, which would be awesome. But if not, that's honestly okay too, because the presence of these lingering mysteries is a big part of what makes Afterimage so compelling in the first place. In the meantime, there are still plenty of secrets left to discover and no shortage of mysteries that may yet be solved. If you haven't already done so, I would strongly encourage you to play through the game yourself, become well acquainted with this rich, vibrant world, and see what you can find hiding in its shadows. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, I really appreciate it, and I would love to hear what thoughts or questions you might have in the comments below. As always, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing future content like this, enable those notifications, and leave a like before you go. With any luck, I'll see you next time.